It was late October when I picked up a load in rural Kansas, a shipment of frozen poultry bound for California. I was running solo, my 18-wheeler fresh off maintenance and smelling of new diesel and metal. The sun had set hours ago, and the sky was the kind of black that feels solid, like it could crush you if you weren't careful. The highway was empty, nothing but my headlights carving a path through the night. I was halfway through my shift, exhausted but alert, when I first saw it. A car parked on the shoulder, hood up, lights off. At first, I thought maybe someone had broken down, but as I drew closer, I noticed there was no driver. No engine, no heat waves, nothing. The car looked older, late 80s model, paint faded and peeling, windows fogged from the inside. The doors were locked. I slowed down, curious, maybe too curious, and when I passed it, I caught movement in the rearview mirror. Something or someone was standing behind it. It didn't move like a normal human. Its posture was stiff, almost puppet-like, limbs twisted at angles that made your stomach knot. It didn't run, didn't stumble, just stood there, staring at me. I couldn't see its face. I only saw the black void beneath a hooded jacket, but I could feel it watching, counting, learning my every motion. My hands went cold on the wheel. I shook it off as fatigue and kept driving, trying to laugh it away. But something in the pit of my stomach told me I hadn't imagined it. Hours later, near the Oklahoma Panhandle, I stopped at a rest area for a quick nap. The lot was deserted. I parked in the farthest corner, tired enough that I didn't bother locking the doors. As soon as I dozed off, I woke with the sound of tapping on the side of my trailer. Light, deliberate, like fingernails against metal. My pulse spiked. I jumped out, flashlight in hand, and there was nothing. Just the empty lot, wind rustling through dead grass, the faint hum of distant traffic I couldn't place. I climbed back into the cab and tried to shake it off. Sleep-deprived mind, I thought. But then I noticed my keys were on the passenger seat. I always kept them in my pocket. And the logbook on the dash was open, turned to a page I didn't remember writing in. The ink was black, smudged. The words chilled me. You can't hide from the road. I locked the doors this time, heart racing, and drove out of the rest area. The highway stretched empty, and for a while, nothing happened. Then I saw headlights in my mirrors. Far off, but closing. Another 18-wheeler, except the shape was wrong. Too low, cab sitting unnaturally high, wheels spaced too far apart. Its lights were dim, flickering, and for a moment I thought it was a hallucination. The truck passed me, and I caught a glimpse of the cab. Inside, something moved. It wasn't human. Its head was too large, shoulders twisted like it had been folded in half, faces pressed against the windows, pale, hollow-eyed, mouths moving in silent screams. The truck didn't slow, didn't acknowledge me. It just hummed, a low, vibrating hum that penetrated the steel of my cab, reverberating through my skull. I tried to shake it off, kept my eyes on the road, but the hum stayed. It followed me, a low growl in the distance, getting closer every few miles. My radio flickered, static crackling like it was alive, and through the white noise I could hear whispers, faint at first, then clear. Driver, join us. By the time I hit New Mexico, I was running on pure adrenaline. I pulled into a truck stop in Albuquerque, trying to convince myself I was hallucinating. The lot was busy, lights glaring, other drivers chatting, filling the night with normalcy. I told the night manager about what I'd seen. He frowned, serious, and said, "You saw the Phantom Hauler." "The what?" "Phantom Hauler. It shows up every few years, always near the same routes. No one knows whose it is. Some say it's the ghosts of drivers who died on the road, bound to the highway forever. People that follow it don't come back the same." I laughed nervously, tried to joke, but he didn't smile. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my truck, doors locked, windows up, hands gripping the wheel even though I wasn't driving. Around 3 a.m. I saw it. Parked outside the lot, lights off, hum vibrating through the ground. I swear it looked at me. Weeks went by and I tried to forget, but I never could. Sometimes late at night I hear the hum in my dreams. Sometimes I catch movement at the edge of my vision, a truck dark and silent, trailer closed, headlights flickering. Sometimes when I pass an empty stretch of road, I swear I see the shapes again, faces pressed against slatted walls, staring, waiting. A month ago, I had a nightmare so vivid I woke screaming. In it, the Phantom Hauler was in my driveway, idling quietly, waiting. The cab door opened, a tall, twisted shape stepping out. It didn't run, it didn't walk, it just hovered toward me, humming. I woke to the sound of my keys rattling on the kitchen counter. I live alone. I don't haul at night anymore. I don't take long routes. I try to stay in towns near lights and people, but I know it's still out there, somewhere on the interstate, watching, waiting, humming low, calling for another driver to join it. I'll never forget those hollow eyes, the way it moved, the way the whispers reached into my head. I've been on the road a long time and I've seen a lot of bad things, but nothing can compare to the feeling of knowing something is out there and it knows your name. Story the end. The rain started early that night, more than a drizzle, more than the kind of rain that made the asphalt shine. It was heavy, relentless, and it smashed against the windshield in steady, merciless sheets. I was on I-80, somewhere in western Nebraska, hauling a refrigerated load of produce from Denver to Chicago. The clock on the dash read 2:47 a.m., and the highways were nearly empty. Only a few big rigs lumbered along like ghostly beasts in the dark. I adjusted the wipers again, muttering under my breath about the weather, wishing I had a co-driver this trip. Most of the time, I didn't mind driving alone, but nights like this, with rain that felt like it could drown you if you stepped outside, it gnawed at me. I had been trucking for nearly 20 years, seen my fair share of accidents, weird roadside things, and the occasional idiot trying to cross the interstate on foot, but something about this night just felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. My radio was off. The static hum in the cab was enough to keep me company. I'd been running for hours, my stomach growling, but I wasn't hungry. Something told me to keep driving until I hit a proper rest stop. The GPS pointed to one about 20 miles up ahead, a small place that looked more like a gas station and diner combo than a real truck stop. By the time I rolled into the lot, my rig's tires squeaked against the wet asphalt, the reflection of the neon "Open 24 Hours" sign wavering in puddles. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was almost deafening. Out in the distance, I heard the faint rumble of another truck approaching, but in this kind of storm, it might as well have been the wind. I stepped out, the rain soaking through my jacket almost instantly. I waved at the clerk behind the counter inside the small diner, who didn't seem to notice me, just kept tapping away at the register. I grabbed a coffee, black, no sugar, and sat by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. That's when I first saw him. I didn't notice him immediately. He was outside, standing by the edge of the parking lot under a flickering light pole. He was tall, thin, wearing what looked like a soaked hoodie, jeans plastered to his legs. His face was obscured by the hood, but he was staring straight at me. I had that gut feeling, the kind every trucker gets when someone out there isn't right. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe he was just a drunk wandering the lot, maybe someone waiting for a ride. But the way he stood, perfectly still, as if rooted to the spot, made me uneasy. I shook my head and focused on my coffee, trying to convince myself it was nothing. When I returned to my rig, I noticed he hadn't moved. The moment I got back in the cab, he was there, walking toward me with that slow as unnatural pace that didn't match the rain-soaked chaos around him. He stopped at the edge of the lot and just watched me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The rational part of my brain said, "Just drive away, idiot." But I was frozen, like watching a deer caught in headlights. I shifted into gear and pressed the accelerator, tires slicing through the puddles, leaving him behind. But as I looked in the side mirror, I swear he was closer than before, standing near the exit ramp, just watching me leave. The rest of the drive to the next rest stop was tense. I kept checking my mirrors, even though I knew it was probably paranoia. Truckers develop a sense for when something is wrong on the road, and I felt it creeping down my spine like ice water. The highway was deserted, and the only other lights were the occasional semi in the distance. I started thinking about old stories, stuff you hear at truck stops, about people who vanish on lonely highways, about hitchhikers who shouldn't exist. My heartbeat picked up. I forced myself to calm down, telling myself it was just someone on the side of the road. I decided to stop at the next truck stop, a larger one in North Platte. Pulling into the lot, I noticed the same feeling. Something wasn't right. The place was nearly empty, which was unusual for that time of night. Usually you'd see at least a few trucks idling, drivers grabbing coffee or stretching their legs. I parked my rig and got out, this time carrying a flashlight, just in case. That's when I saw it again, the figure. Standing at the edge of the lot, under a flickering light, hood up, hands in pockets. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was someone waiting for a friend, someone drunk, a hallucination from exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't. I went inside, trying to focus on something normal. Anything normal. The diner smelled like stale coffee and fried food. A guy behind the counter barely looked up when I ordered a burger and another coffee. I sat near the door, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. Hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes, but every time I glanced out the window, that same figure was there. Sometimes he moved a step closer, sometimes he disappeared entirely, only to reappear at the edge of my vision. By the time I finished my food, I was exhausted. The storm outside hadn't let up. I decided to get back on the road, even though I didn't like leaving the safety of a lit lot. I noticed my rig's dashboard was fogged, the wipers barely keeping up. As I started the engine, I saw him again, now closer than I remembered, almost at the edge of the lot. And then he stepped into the road, not crossing, just standing. My heart slammed against my ribs. I slammed the brakes, tires squealing on wet asphalt. He vanished before I could see him properly, like he had never been there. I drove on, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. I must have been tired, hallucinating. But deep down, I knew it wasn't my mind. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. I called dispatch, pretending to chat about traffic, just to hear another human voice. They laughed about the weather, nothing unusual, nothing helpful. I kept my eyes on the road, scanning the tree lines, the shoulders, the dark stretches of highway. Hours later, somewhere in Iowa, I started seeing other things. Shadows moving along the shoulder, figures stepping out, vanishing when I looked straight at them. I passed small towns, completely dark, not a single light on in most houses. My radio kept cutting out, static so loud I had to turn it off. My cab felt different, heavy, like it was full of someone else's presence. At one rest stop, I finally decided to pull over for a nap. I was shaking, drenched in sweat despite the cold, my nerves fried. I parked at the far end of the lot and tried to sleep. That's when I heard knocking. Light, almost playful, but deliberate. At first, I thought it was another trucker, messing with me. But the lot was empty. My stomach knotted. I grabbed the flashlight and peered out the window. Nothing. Just rain, puddles, and darkness. I shut my eyes, trying to breathe, and then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Closer this time. On the side of my trailer, my heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed the radio, pretending to call dispatch, hoping for any sign of normalcy. The knocking stopped. Morning came, finally. The storm had passed, but the roads were slick, gray, and empty. I drove through desolate stretches, trying to put the night behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of someone in the mirrors, standing in the median, disappearing when I looked directly. 2 nights later, in Illinois, I was driving through a particularly empty stretch of highway, heading toward Chicago. The sun had set and the fog rolled in, thick and suffocating. I could barely see 50 feet in front of the truck. I kept my speed slow, lights on high beam, when I saw him again. The same figure, standing in the center of the lane. My stomach dropped. I hit the horn, tires skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. He didn't move. I swerved into the shoulder, heart pounding, adrenaline making my hands shake. And then he was gone. No sound, no movement, no sign he had ever been there. I called 911 out of habit, though I knew it was useless. The operator assured me there were no reports of anyone standing in the road. By the time I reached Chicago, I was exhausted beyond reason. Every night since, I've had the same dreams. Driving, rain, shadows in the distance, that same figure waiting for me. Trucking has taught me to ignore weird things, chalk them up to fatigue or imagination, but this was different. Something out there follows trucks. Something that waits in the dark, in storms, on empty roads, watching, always watching. I still drive, I still haul freight, but I no longer go out at night when storms hit. And when I do, I keep the radio on, windows up, doors locked, hoping, praying that I don't see him again. Because when I do, well, I don't think anyone survives that encounter unchanged. Some truckers call it the Shadow Man, some call it the Watcher. I don't know who or what it is, but I know one thing for certain. Out there on the endless stretches of interstate, in the middle of nowhere, when the rain falls hard and the night is blacker than anything you've ever seen, it's waiting. watching, and it doesn't like to be ignored. Every time I start my rig at night, I glance at the side mirrors, half expecting to see that hooded figure standing there just outside the reach of the headlights. I pray I never do. And I warn anyone who hauls alone, if you see him, if you feel the presence, don't stop. Don't even think about looking back. Just drive. Keep driving. Because if you don't, you might not make it. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I rolled out of the truck stop in rural Kansas. I had been hauling freight across the Midwest for over a decade, and late-night runs weren't anything new to me. The roads were mostly empty, except for the occasional car or another big rig, their headlights cutting through the thick fog that had settled over the plains. I was tired but stubborn. I needed to get this load to St. Louis by morning, and a few extra hours on the road felt like a reasonable gamble. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of frozen meat, and as the hum of the rig and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on asphalt lulled me into a near drowse, I started noticing something unusual. Somewhere back near the Missouri-Kansas border, the fog seemed unnaturally thick, swallowing the yellow lines on the road like ink. I glanced at my GPS. It showed the road ahead as empty, straight, nothing but highway stretching endlessly. But my gut told me something was off. The first oddity was the truck that appeared behind me. At first, I didn't pay much attention. It was another big rig, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I drove, I realized that it wasn't passing me. It was keeping pace, tailing me almost perfectly. I tried to signal, turn on my hazards, even slow down to see if it would pass. It didn't. Whatever driver was behind the wheel seemed fixated, relentless, matching my every maneuver. I pulled into a small rest area to stretch my legs. The lot was deserted, lit by a single flickering lamp post. As I climbed out, I saw it. The other truck parked at the far end, engine running, lights dim but on. I squinted, expecting a familiar logo or company name. There was nothing, just a dark, featureless rig. My heart started to beat a little faster, and a cold sweat ran down my back. Normally, I didn't get jumpy about things like this, but there was something wrong about this truck. Something empty about it. I watched for a few minutes, and then, as if it had been watching me, the truck slowly started to move toward the exit. I shook my head and got back in my cab, feeling uneasy. The road ahead was silent, the fog still thick. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that it was some other trucker who had gotten off later than me, someone just coincidentally following the same route. But as I merged back onto the highway, I noticed the headlights again, appearing through the fog in my mirrors almost immediately. Hours passed like this. Every time I thought I'd lost it, the truck was there again. I started taking small detours, weaving through truck stops, exits, gas stations. Each time it reappeared like it was anticipating my moves. My fatigue turned into fear. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? Some truck is following me. I don't know who's inside, and I can't lose it. It sounded insane even to me. By 3 a.m., I was in Missouri, somewhere near a small town that didn't even appear on my GPS. The fog was so dense that the road barely existed in front of me. I could only see a few yards ahead, just enough to stay on the asphalt. And then the truck appeared in my rearview mirror, impossibly close, almost touching my trailer. There was still no visible driver, no markings, nothing, just a looming darkness behind me. I panicked. I slammed the accelerator and took the next exit, which led to a narrow back road cutting through the woods. The tires crunched on gravel as I raced through, heart hammering. For a few miles, I didn't see it, and relief washed over me, but then I saw it ahead, blocking the road entirely. The truck was stopped, engine idling, lights dim, occupying every inch of the narrow lane. My stomach dropped. There was nowhere to go. I tried to back up, but the gravel was loose, and my trailer jackknifed slightly, forcing me to correct. My cab radio crackled suddenly, static and then faint whispers, like someone speaking just out of reach. I slammed the radio off, my hands trembling. I could hear my own breathing now, ragged, loud in the cab. And then I saw movement through the fog, the outline of a figure standing beside the road. Tall, thin, completely still, facing me. No reflective clothing, no features I could make out. Just a shadow. I honked, shouted, anything to get it to move. It didn't. It just stood there. I tried to go around it on the shoulder, but the truck in front seemed to grow larger, impossible in width, as if it had expanded to block me completely. I slammed the truck in reverse, attempting to retreat, but the trailer hit the ditch, tires spinning uselessly. Panic overtook me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, aiming it toward the figure. The beam caught a face, or what I thought was a face. Hollow eyes, skin pale and gray, stretched tight over its skull. Its mouth opened, not to speak, but in a silent scream that seemed to pull at the air itself. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the ditch. My flashlight dropped, rolling into the fog, and the figure was gone. I ran back to my cab, my hands fumbling with the keys. When I started the engine, the truck was gone too. The road ahead seemed clear, but the air was heavy, thick with something wrong. I drove blindly for another hour, shaking, hoping the sun would rise, hoping I'd reach civilization. Eventually, I hit a small town, lights on, people moving, normalcy returning bit by bit. I parked in a diner lot, sat in my cab, and tried to calm myself. I never saw the truck again. I never saw the figure again. I called dispatch in the morning and reported strange events on the back roads, fog, another truck following, but they laughed it off as fatigue. Some even joked about seeing phantom truckers out there at night. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. That shadowed truck and the figure, it wasn't human, at least not entirely. After that night, I started taking daytime routes exclusively. I avoided back roads, avoided fog, avoided long stretches with no traffic. Every time I drive alone at night, though, I check my mirrors obsessively. My mind can't shake the memory of those hollow eyes, the silent scream, the looming shadow of a truck that shouldn't have existed. Months later, I was talking to another long-haul driver at a truck stop in Oklahoma. He mentioned seeing a truck without plates on a foggy road late at night, following him relentlessly too. He described it almost exactly like mine, dark, featureless, impossible to overtake. He said he'd never stopped to investigate, just drove until the fog cleared, and it disappeared. I nodded silently, realizing I wasn't the only one. I've driven those highways countless times since then, but something inside me changed that night. I don't speed anymore. I don't take risks. I sleep in truck stops when the roads get foggy, and I don't go out late at night if I can help it. But there are times when I'm alone on the road and the fog rolls in thick and sudden. I see a shadow in my mirror, a dim light appearing behind me, moving closer no matter how fast I go. And in those moments, I remember the figure, the silent scream, and the impossible truck that chased me across the empty plains of Missouri and Kansas. I still drive. I can't stop. It's my life, my work. But I've learned one thing. Some things are better left alone. Some trucks are not meant to be overtaken. Some roads are not meant to be driven at night. And some figures in the fog, well, they're not human and they're not friendly. It was 2 years ago now. I had nearly forgotten about it, tucked it away like a bad dream. Until last week when I was leaving a small trucking lot outside St. Louis and I saw it again. That same dark rig sitting just at the edge of the fog that had rolled in, engine idling silently, lights dim, and in the mirror I caught a glimpse of the figure, hollow eyes, pale, stretched skin, and that silent scream. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove, praying it would vanish in the mist, praying I'd wake up in daylight and find this was just another hallucination caused by fatigue. But I know better. I've lived it. I've run from it. And deep down, I know it will be there again, somewhere, waiting for another trucker foolish enough to drive those empty highways alone at night in the fog. No one else will ever believe it. They'll call me crazy, say it's exhaustion, imagination, stress. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt, and I'll never forget the way it followed me. Silent, patient, inevitable. Some nights, when the wind is just right, I can still hear the faint hum of its engine, just at the edge of hearing, like a promise. I keep a flask in the cab now, not for drinking, but for holding something solid, something tangible in a world that sometimes feels like it's slipping into something else. The radio, always on. I need the noise to keep the silence at bay. And when the fog comes, and it always does, I drive slower, my hands tight on the wheel, eyes glued to the mirrors, waiting, waiting. Waiting for the impossible truck, for the figure that shouldn't exist, for the horror that waits on the empty highways of America, patient and eternal. Even now, sometimes I see a dark shape in the distance on roads I know like the back of my hand. And I remember that night in Kansas, the figure on the side of the road, the truck that shouldn't have existed. And I pray to God I never get caught behind it again. I don't take back roads anymore. I don't drive alone at night if I can avoid it. I stick to major highways, well lit, crowded, and yet sometimes when the sun sets and the fog rolls in thicker than it has any right to, I feel it again. That heavy presence, that impossible darkness, creeping closer in my mirrors, waiting. And I know, one night, no matter what I do, it will find me. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I pulled onto the rest stop just off I-70 in eastern Kansas. My rig, a worn Peterbilt 379 with more miles on it than I cared to count, growled as I eased it into a deserted parking spot near the back. The lot was nearly empty. The faint hum of fluorescent light spun off the asphalt, and the smell of diesel and fast food hung thick in the cold night air. I'd been on the road for nearly 20 hours straight, hauling a refrigerated load of produce from Chicago to Denver, and my eyelids felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. Sleep was supposed to be the easiest part, just a few hours in the sleeper, a little shut-eye, then back on the road. I had no idea that this stop would be the start of something that would haunt me for years. I pulled the keys from the ignition, letting the engine idle down, and grabbed my duffel bag. The rest stop itself was a rundown facility, the kind most truckers avoided if they could, but it was close to my route and I was too exhausted to care. The doors creaked as I entered the lobby. Behind the counter, a man in a stained uniform dozed in a chair, his head lolling to the side. I mumbled a greeting, but he didn't respond. Fine, I didn't need to buy anything. I just wanted a cup of coffee. I grabbed a styrofoam cup from the dispenser, poured the steaming liquid, and headed back to my truck. I climbed into the cab, pulled the curtains around the sleeper, and settled into the narrow bed. The coffee burned my throat, but it was the only thing that would keep me semi-conscious for the next couple of hours. I didn't even notice the sound at first, the faint tapping against the side of the truck. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe the metal siding of the trailer reacting to the cold night. But then it came again, a slow, deliberate tap, tap. I froze. The sound was coming from the passenger side of the cab, right where the window was. I got up, heart thudding, and peeked through the small glass. Nothing, just the empty asphalt, the flickering light of the lot, and my own reflection staring back at me. I shook my head and laughed nervously, telling myself I was just tired. Maybe I needed a smoke. I reached into the glove compartment, grabbed a pack of cigarettes, and lit one. The smoke curled lazily into the cab, and I let out a long breath, trying to calm my nerves. Then I heard it again. Tap, 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 louder this time, almost like someone was rapping a knuckle against the metal. I jumped up and flung open the door. The lot was empty. My rig sat alone, the shadows stretching long and eerie under the harsh glow of the streetlights. I circled the truck, checking for anything out of place. There was nothing. No one, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been near the cab at all. I climbed back in, trying to shake it off, thinking maybe it was just my imagination running wild. I turned off the dome light and lay back down, trying to sleep. The tapping didn't stop. It moved. From the passenger side, it shifted toward the rear of the trailer, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing. My chest tightened. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the cab. Empty. I shone it out the window, scanning the lot. Still nothing. I tried calling the dispatcher, my hands shaking, but my phone had no signal. That was normal out here, but tonight it felt like a punishment. I told myself to breathe, to calm down, to stop thinking like some idiot horror movie victim. I tried to sleep again. That's when I saw it. A face. Just for a second in the reflection of the window. Pale, twisted, with hollow eyes that seemed too big for the skull. I froze, staring into the glass, but when I blinked, it was gone. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and flung open the door. Nothing. The lot was still empty, the wind rustling faintly through the trash cans near the convenience store. I shook my head. I was losing it. Tired, stressed, all that driving. I decided I needed to move. I'd wait until sunrise. I started the engine, the diesel growl filling the night, and backed out slowly. That's when I saw him, or it. At the far edge of the lot, near the chain-link fence, a figure was standing perfectly still. Tall, thin, with long, stringy hair that hung down past the shoulders. The clothing was tattered like some old prospector from the 1800s. But what froze me was the face. completely pale, like wax, with eyes that reflected the headlights in a way that didn't make sense. There was no blink, no movement, just a stare that drilled into my chest. I slammed the truck into drive and floored it. The diesel roared, the tires squealed against the asphalt, and I didn't look back. Not for a mile. Not even when I hit the highway and the figure was gone. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. I tried to convince myself it was someone messing with me, maybe a local drifter. But then came the calls. My phone finally had service about an hour down the road. The first was a text from an unknown number. "You left something behind." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, fingers numb, unable to reply. Then a second came through. "I'm still here." I was shaking, hands trembling on the wheel. The highway stretched endlessly before me, dark and empty, except for the dim glow of distant trucks. Every reflective sign, every mile marker, every road reflector seemed to watch me. I called the cops when I reached the next town. They thought it was a prank, some kid texting from a burner phone. They said there had been no reports, no one matching my description seen at the rest stop. I tried to sleep that night in a hotel. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, pale and hollow, standing at the edge of the room, just watching. I woke up with scratches along my arms, shallow, red lines, like fingernails dragging across the skin. I hadn't done it. I hadn't been anywhere near a sharp object. I thought maybe it was a nightmare, but it hurt too much. Weeks passed. I avoided that stretch of I-70, taking longer routes, staying away from lonely rest stops. But the calls continued. Different numbers, unknown, always the same messages. "You left something behind. I'm still here. Look behind you." Every time I tried to trace them, they came from burner phones, untraceable. One night about a month later, I was on I-35 through Missouri hauling a load of frozen meat. The highway was dead, no other trucks for miles. I stopped at a small rural rest stop to use the restroom. When I came back, someone had left a note on my windshield. I don't remember reading it consciously at first. I just felt my stomach churn. The words were scrawled in shaky, uneven letters. "You can't run from me." I called the cops again. This time, they went to the rest stop, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs anyone had been there, no note. My rig was parked in exactly the same place I'd left it. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. Maybe it was the stress, the long hours, the loneliness of the road. But then, 2 nights later, I pulled over in Oklahoma, just south of Tulsa, near a river crossing. The night was quiet, fog creeping in off the water. I lit a cigarette and stepped out of the cab. The fog swirled around my boots. That's when I heard the voice. Whispered, low, like someone right behind my ear, "You can't hide." I spun around. The lot was empty. No one there. I ran back into the cab, slammed the door, locked it, and started the engine. That's when I saw him, or it, again. A figure standing under the yellow glow of the single streetlight staring straight at me. Closer this time. No more than 30 feet away. The hair hung in wet, tangled strands. The eyes, black pits, glimmered in the fog. I floored it, tires squealing as I tore onto the highway. From that night on, the horror never stopped. Every empty lot, every foggy rest stop, every lonely stretch of highway became a potential trap. I started sleeping during the day, driving at night, trying to avoid the figure, the calls, the messages. Friends and family stopped answering when I tried to explain. They thought I was losing it. I didn't care. I couldn't stop. One night, a couple of weeks later, I was parked at a truck stop outside Wichita. The lot was empty, the fluorescent lights flickering. I was sitting in the cab, trying to get some sleep, when the tap started again. Slow, deliberate, tap, tap. I didn't even look outside this time. I just grabbed the CB radio and keyed the mic. "This is Jake, over," I said, voice shaking. Static. Then, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 nails scratching across metal, it whispered back, "You left the light on." I don't know how I drove the next few miles. I don't know how I kept my eyes open, my hands on the wheel. I only know that I never, ever went back to that I-70 rest stop again, or any rest stop at all, if I could help it. The figure, the voice, the messages, they followed. Always, everywhere. And I knew deep down that it wasn't something I could ever outrun. Years have passed, but the memories haven't faded. Every truck stop I see on the road, every stretch of empty highway, I imagine that pale face watching me from the shadows. Every time my phone buzzes with an unknown number, I flinch. Every time I feel a tap on the side of the cab, I freeze. And I know, without a doubt, that somewhere out there, in the fog, in the darkness, it's still waiting. Watching. No one believes truckers like me when we talk about things like this. They call it fatigue, hallucinations, stress, but I know the truth. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that somewhere out there along a lonely stretch of interstate, it's still waiting for the next trucker to park, to sleep, to let their guard down. Sometimes when I'm driving alone, headlights cutting through the night, I swear I can see it in the rearview mirror. Pale, hollow-eyed, standing under a flickering streetlight, tapping on the metal of some empty trailer. And I know as long as I keep driving, I'll never be safe. I quit long haul for good after that. Took a local route, stayed near home, avoided the night. But even then, every time I pass a foggy overpass or a deserted lot, I feel it. Watching, waiting. The tapping never really stopped. I don't sleep well. I don't trust the dark. And I don't answer unknown calls anymore because I know, if I do, it'll find me again. Story the end. It was late November, and the interstate was nearly empty. I had been hauling a load of frozen poultry from Minnesota down to Louisiana, the kind of long haul that feels endless when you're the only person awake on the road. I had driven these routes for over a decade, seen snowstorms that made visibility zero, caught the sunrise in Kansas fields that stretched forever, and had my fair share of close calls. But nothing prepared me for what happened that week. I'd just crossed into Missouri after leaving Iowa, and the sky had grown dark earlier than usual. The radio was barely picking up anything besides static and a few faint country stations. My rig hummed steadily, and the only light came from the dim glow of my dashboard and the occasional reflection of highway signs. I kept my eyes on the road, the weight of the frozen cargo pressing me into my seat, making it feel like the truck itself was alive and heavy with intent. Around 9:30 p.m., I took a rest stop off a deserted exit. It was one of those little strips with a single convenience store and a pump island, empty except for a rusty pickup in the corner. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped out. The cold air hit my face hard, and I immediately noticed the smell of wet earth mixed with exhaust. I walked into the store for coffee and snacks, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The clerk was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, and he gave me a long, hard look before muttering a greeting. I shrugged it off. I got back to my truck, sipped my coffee, and fired up the engine. Just as I was merging back onto the highway, I saw movement on the shoulder, a figure standing in the dark. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, but something about the way they stood, motionless, unnerved me. They didn't wave or step forward. They just stared. I slowed down, keeping my eyes on them, but as I passed, they were gone. No car had picked them up, no sign of a path leading into the woods beside the road. I told myself it was my imagination. Long hours on the interstate do strange things to a mind. I drove for another 3 hours before I started noticing the trucks behind me. Not the usual semis that pass or tailgate aggressively. These were old rigs, older than anything I'd seen in service, their headlights dim and yellowed. One would appear in my rearview mirror, keep pace for 10 or 15 miles, then vanish without a trace. When I checked the mirrors again, there was nothing there. I called dispatch, told them about the strange rigs, and they laughed it off. Must be tired, man. Keep your eyes on the road. I wanted to agree, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The highway stretched endlessly, and every time I glanced into the dark spaces between the trees, it felt like eyes were following me. I stopped for fuel in a small Missouri town around 2 a.m. The place was closed except for a small attendant shack. The man inside seemed familiar, though I couldn't place him, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. He nodded when I told him I was heading south. Careful out there. Some folks don't make it past the stretches near the river. I nodded politely, assuming he was referring to icy roads or bad weather. Back on the highway, the feeling of being followed returned. A semi appeared behind me again, closer than before. Its engine made a low, groaning sound, and I noticed the license plate. Just a series of numbers, no state, no letters, nothing I could identify. I tried radio chatter, called over the CB, asked if anyone was out there. No response. By the time I reached the Mississippi River crossing, I was exhausted, fighting the edges of sleep. That's when I saw it again. The figure. This time, it was in the middle of the bridge, standing under the dim streetlights. I swerved slightly, heart pounding, expecting them to dart away. But they didn't move. I honked, yelled, anything to get them to move, and the figure slowly turned. My blood ran cold. Their face was blank, featureless like smooth gray stone. I slammed on the gas, praying I could make it across before whatever that was reached the guardrail. After the bridge, I pulled over in a rest area, shaking, sweating, trying to tell myself it was a hallucination. I called my wife back home, needing a voice that was real, and I could barely get the words out. She told me to find a hotel, rest, and not drive any further. I laughed, but I also agreed. I knew I couldn't keep driving like that. I found a cheap motel in Memphis, the kind that smelled of mildew and old cigarettes. The clerk barely looked at me as I checked in. I dropped my bag in the room and turned on the TV for background noise. But the noise wasn't enough to drown out the sense of unease gnawing at me. I looked out the window and saw headlights. They were across the street, idling. A big rig, old, yellowed lights, no markings, and in the passenger seat, or where a passenger should be, there was nothing. But somehow, I felt it was there, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bridge figure, the faceless stare, the endless highway. By morning, I was pale and jittery. I had to leave, but not before I checked out. The motel clerk was gone, replaced by someone new, who didn't know my name or see the receipt I'd left on the counter. Odd, but I brushed it off, telling myself I needed coffee more than answers. Back on the road, I tried to keep my mind occupied with radio chatter, music, anything to keep the images away. But the trucks returned, shadowing me mile after mile. I tried taking exits, changing lanes, but they always appeared again, like the highway itself was a trap, and I was the prey. Somewhere in northern Mississippi, I took another rest stop, desperate. There were a few other truckers there, and I hoped for normal conversation, maybe a distraction. But the lot was empty except for my rig and an old pickup. As I got out, I noticed the pickup's bed empty except for a wooden crate. The crate was old, weathered, but it seemed wrong. I couldn't explain it. I didn't touch it. I walked to the bathroom, tried to splash water on my face, and when I came back, the crate was gone. I thought I was losing it. But then I heard the engine. My rig. I turned, and the cab door opened. Nobody inside, just the seat moving slightly, as if someone had been there and disappeared. I got back in, locked the doors, and drove off. That's when I noticed the road signs were wrong. I knew this highway. I had driven it dozens of times, yet mile markers and exit signs had shifted, numbers repeating, towns I'd never seen before. And the sky, it was wrong too dark. The stars positioned oddly. The horizon seemed closer, bending inward, like the road was closing in. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't make sense anymore. The trucks kept pace behind me, sometimes disappearing into shadows, other times right on my tail. I couldn't call for help. Cell service vanished, leaving nothing but dead silence and static. Then I saw the figure again, walking along the shoulder, faceless, gray, slow. My rig swerved violently as I tried to avoid it, tires screeching. The semi behind me slammed brakes, but I didn't hear the crash. Just the sound of wind, my own heartbeat, and the relentless groan of that other truck following me. I don't remember how long I drove, but eventually I hit a clearing, lights from a small town. Relief washed over me. I pulled into a truck stop, shaking, exhausted, praying for normalcy. Inside, the lot was filled with rigs as drivers chatting, coffee brewing. Everything was normal. Too normal. I stepped out to stretch my legs and nearly screamed. Every single truck in the lot was old, rusted, their headlights dim and yellowed. License plates were missing or blank, and standing in the middle of the lot, staring at me, was the figure. Faceless, gray, and smiling. Though how a face without features could smile, I didn't understand. I turned and ran, back into the truck, starting the engine. I drove without thought, following the GPS this time, ignoring exits, staying on the main highway. The trucks vanished, the figure disappeared, and the world slowly returned to something familiar. I made it to Louisiana, delivered the load. No one asked why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't volunteer the story. I don't talk about it much, but I know what I saw. I know what followed me on that interstate, night after night, mile after mile. Sometimes, when I'm parked at a rest stop, drinking coffee in the early morning hours, I'll catch a reflection in my mirrors. A truck that wasn't there a second ago, headlights dim and yellowed, or a shadow standing at the edge of the lot, motionless, staring. And I remember that night, the endless road, the faceless figure. I've never stopped trucking, though. The roads call me, and I can't resist. But I've learned one rule: never stop on lonely stretches at night. Never take your eyes off the mirrors. And if you see a truck behind you that seems too old, too quiet, or a figure standing in the dark, just drive. Don't look back. Because some things on the highway don't belong to this world, and once they notice you, there's no telling where they'll follow. Even now, years later, I still feel that presence sometimes, creeping along the shoulder, keeping pace just out of view. I've tried to explain it logically, chalk it up to fatigue or imagination, but the marks on the side of my rig, long, deep scratches that weren't there when I parked, tell another story. They're patient. They wait. And the road is theirs as much as it is mine. Story the end. It was past midnight when I pulled my rig onto the shoulder of Route 66, somewhere past the stretches of Arizona that seem endless under a black sky. The moon was hiding behind clouds, and the air smelled of dust and diesel. I'd been driving for over 18 hours straight, hauling a refrigerated load of produce from Chicago to Los Angeles, trying to beat some kind of delivery deadline that seemed more like a suggestion than a requirement. The highway was empty. The kind of empty that feels like it's swallowing you whole. That's when I first saw the truck. It wasn't moving, just parked on the shoulder ahead. The cab was dark, no lights, no reflectors blinking, just sitting there like a rusted carcass. My first thought was that someone had broken down, maybe a younger driver, inexperienced, too tired to get to a truck stop. I slowed down and nudged my truck over to the shoulder next to it, my headlights cutting through the shadows. The truck looked old, an old Freightliner with peeling paint, but nothing seemed unusual, except that there wasn't a soul in sight. I pulled up beside it and rolled down my window. Silence, the kind that presses in from all sides. My gut told me to leave, just keep rolling, but something, I don't know, maybe curiosity or stupidity, made me get out. I walked around the front of my rig toward the truck. Its engine was cold, no lights on inside. The door was slightly ajar. That's when I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible humming, like someone was singing in a distant, gravelly voice. "Hello?" I called. No response. I leaned closer to the cab and saw movement, not inside, but through the shadows between the seats. Something small moved in the back, a shape hunched over like it was crammed into the sleeper. My first thought was a kid, a stowaway maybe, or someone trying to hide. Then the humming stopped, and the silence felt thicker. I reached for the door handle. It swung open easily, and I froze. Inside the cab, everything looked normal at first glance. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no overturned items, but the air smelled strange, metallic, sweet, and sour at the same time. That smell got into my lungs and made me cough. And then I saw it. A hand, pale and slick, emerging slowly from the corner of the sleeper. Fingers bent wrong, the joints making little popping noises. The thing or person looked up at me, and I'll never forget those eyes. Wide, black, wet, and staring. Not angry, not scared, just waiting. I stepped back. My heart was hammering. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet were glued to the asphalt. Then the thing whispered my name. Not out loud, not humanly, but in my head. "Driver," it said, dragging the syllables, tasting them, stretching them out. I bolted back to my truck, fumbling with the keys, slamming the door, and peeling out onto the highway. My headlights passed the truck again, and in that second, I swore I saw it standing beside the cab now. Impossibly tall, limbs twisting at angles that shouldn't exist, face pressed like it was trying to flatten itself against reality. I didn't stop for miles. I pulled into a rest stop just past Flagstaff, shaking, trying to calm down. I called the highway patrol to report the truck, gave them the location, but they told me there was nothing there. No truck, no call of distress, nothing. I felt my stomach drop. I must have imagined it, right? Maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. Trucking is lonely work. You see things that aren't there when your brain wants sleep. I decided to push on. Sleep could wait, and besides, I had a delivery window that could ruin me financially if I missed it. Around 3 a.m., somewhere in the Nevada desert, I saw it again. That same old Freightliner, sitting on the shoulder, door open. Only this time it was different. The humming was louder, resonating from inside like it was coming from my own chest. I braked, But the truck didn't react. And there it was, standing in the same place I'd seen before, and somehow it was following me. Not on the road, just in the periphery, moving when I moved. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was a trick of the desert heat, reflections on the asphalt, hallucinations. But every curve I took, every mile I logged, it stayed in sight, just beyond the shoulder, watching. That's when I realized something worse. There was no other traffic at all. No cars, no trucks, nothing except me and that shape. By sunrise, I was driving like a man possessed, not stopping for anything. I took the first exit, pulled into a diner, hoping for other people, lights, normalcy. The waitress was sweet, old-fashioned, smiled like everything was fine. I ordered coffee and tried to explain what had happened. She nodded slowly and asked, "You been seeing the highway ghost again?" I stared. "What?" "The truck," she said. "Old Freightliner. Shows up every few years. No one knows whose it is. People see it and don't come back the same." I laughed nervously, told her I had been up too long. She didn't push. She just slid the coffee across, steam curling into the morning sun. I didn't ask more. I didn't want to, but the words stuck. The highway ghost. It wasn't just a joke. It was a warning. I tried to shake it off, thinking that maybe it was someone who had died on that stretch of road, and my mind filled in the blanks. But that night, when I pulled over for a nap at a truck stop near Bakersfield, I saw it again. I'd parked in the lot, diesel fumes thick in the air. I dozed off, but a hum woke me. Low, metallic, vibrating through the steel of my truck. I opened my eyes. The Freightliner was there, just sitting, door open, empty, but humming. I wanted to scream, but my voice stuck. The hum grew louder, like a chorus of whispers. Then the seats inside the cab shifted, not by human hands, and I saw dozens of faces pressed against the glass, mouths moving, eyes wide, staring at me. They weren't people. Not entirely. They were twisted, elongated, like shadows of humans who had been bent by something unnatural. The next morning, I called my dispatcher and told him I wasn't driving today. He didn't question me. Truckers don't ask questions when the words highway ghost come up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had followed me. I drove home, trying to stay awake, constantly checking the rearview mirrors, but the road was empty. Weeks later, I started getting phone calls. No caller ID, just static at first, then faint humming, then a voice whispering my name. Sometimes it would be during a nap, sometimes while I was driving my personal car. My girlfriend noticed, but I told her it was stress, that the long hauls were getting to me. Deep down, I knew it wasn't stress. I knew it was connected to that truck. One night, I got reckless. I went back to Route 66. I had to see it, had to know if it was real. I drove the stretch between Flagstaff and Kingman. The sun had set, the desert sky black. And there it was, exactly where I first saw it, door open, lights off, humming. I stopped my truck 20 feet away. The air got cold, unnatural, my breath fogged. I could see movement inside, dozens of shapes crammed in the sleeper cab, faces staring out at me. And then I saw a reflection in the mirrors that wasn't mine. A tall, thin shape, black as tar, limbs twisted like broken tree branches, leaning out of the open door, and it smiled. Not a human smile. Something inhuman, wrong, sharp teeth glinting. I threw my truck in reverse, screaming. But the Freightliner followed, impossibly fast for something that shouldn't have moved. My rig's engine roared, tires screaming against asphalt, my heart hammering in my chest. I floored it. Somehow I managed to escape, but the image of that thing stayed with me. The faces, the humming, the way it had called my name from inside my own head. I never returned to that stretch of road. I changed routes, avoided 66 entirely, even took longer hauls just to stay away. But the hum followed. Even months later, in my own home, I hear it sometimes when I'm alone at night. Low, metallic, vibrating through the walls. And sometimes in the corner of my bedroom, I catch a glimpse of that old Freightliner, parked silently, waiting, door open, like it's always been waiting. I've stopped driving at night as much as I can. I avoid highways after dark. Trucking used to be my life. Now it's my nightmare. I still dream of that cab, of the eyes, of the faces pressed against the glass. And in those dreams, I can hear it whispering my name, calling me back to the road, to where it waits, patient, eternal, and hungry. Story the end. It was just past midnight when Mike rolled out of the rest stop outside of Amarillo, Texas, after grabbing a lukewarm cup of coffee and a bag of stale beef jerky. The highway was mostly empty. the faint hum of his 18-wheeler's engine blending with the occasional rustle of the desert wind. He'd been on the road for nearly 18 hours straight, hauling refrigerated goods from Los Angeles to Oklahoma City. And the fatigue was starting to gnaw at him in a way caffeine and muscle memory couldn't fix. He knew better than to push too far when he was this tired, but the schedule was tight, and the company expected him to make up lost time after a delay at the border. The sun had long disappeared behind the flat horizon, leaving only the dim glow of his dashboard and the occasional flicker of a road sign. The headlights cut through the darkness in long, golden arcs, illuminating stretches of empty asphalt that seemed endless. The radio had long since gone silent. Static-filled country stations came and went, but nothing held his attention. All Mike had was the monotony of the road and the low, mechanical thrum of his rig. About 90 minutes outside Amarillo, he noticed a dark figure standing at the edge of the road, just past a gentle curve. At first, he thought it was some hitchhiker trying to catch a ride, but as he slowed down and the headlights swept over it, the figure remained motionless, almost rigid. Mike hesitated, gripping the wheel a little tighter. He didn't pick up hitchhikers, too many horror stories out there, but something about this figure didn't sit right. The man was tall, thin, dressed in tattered clothing that hung off him like loose burlap, and his face was obscured by shadows. There was a strange quality to the way he stood, like he was rooted to the asphalt. Mike's instincts screamed at him to go around, and that's exactly what he did, hugging the left shoulder and giving the figure plenty of space. Yet, in the reflection of the side mirror, it seemed as though the figure had moved closer to the center line, as if he had stepped forward while Mike's eyes weren't on him. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Get some sleep, man. You're seeing things." But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. As he drove, he noticed the shadows at the roadside seemed deeper, darker, almost stretching toward him. The wind, which had been low and consistent, began to pick up, whistling past the cab in unnatural ways. Mike tried to convince himself it was just fatigue, that the long hours behind the wheel were playing tricks on him. He reached for his flask of water and took a sip, glancing at the digital clock on the dash. 2:13 a.m. About 30 minutes later, he rounded another curve and saw something on the horizon. A truck, or at least what looked like a truck. The headlights were off, but the shape was unmistakable. A semi, parked awkwardly across the right lane, facing the wrong direction. The closer he got, the more something felt wrong. The truck's cab appeared older than any rig he'd seen in years, the paint peeling and rust covering patches of the metal. But what really unsettled him were the windows. Blacked out, opaque as if they weren't glass at all. Mike slowed, flicking on his hazard lights. He didn't want to hit anything, but he also didn't want to stop. He eased his rig to the left, giving the strange truck a wide berth, and passed it slowly. That's when he heard it, a soft, low knock, rhythmic, coming from the side of the cab. Not a sound the wind would make, not a bump from the road. It sounded intentional. Mike's stomach dropped. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, telling himself to keep moving. But when he glanced in his side mirror, he swore he saw a hand pressed against the blackened window, dragging down slowly, as if someone or something inside wanted to follow him. He floored the accelerator, heart hammering, and the sound of his rig roaring seemed deafening in the night. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of darkness, and the blackened truck disappeared from his mirrors as if it had vanished entirely. Mike laughed nervously, shaking his head. "Goddamn desert hallucinations," he muttered, but the sense of unease wouldn't leave him. Something about that truck wasn't right. Hours passed. He stayed alert, scanning the road ahead for any sign of the figure or the truck. By the time he reached Oklahoma City, the first hints of dawn were touching the horizon. He pulled into a truck stop, exhausted, desperate for a shower and a real meal. He told the night manager about the figure in the truck, expecting maybe a chuckle or a dismissive comment, but the man's face went pale. You didn't stop, did you?" the manager asked, voice barely above a whisper. "No. What? Why?" Mike asked, confused. "That stretch," the man said, glancing toward the east where the highway stretched endlessly. "People see things, trucks, people out there, but it's not normal. Some never come back. Some say they're chased and the trucks, some say they're empty, but..." They're not. Nobody's seen them for years, and then some folks see them again just at night, and the ones who do don't always make it to sunrise. Mike's stomach turned. He laughed, nervously, trying to shake it off. You're messing with me, right? The manager shook his head. I'm not. You want a room? Sleep. Don't drive again tonight, and whatever you do, don't look too close at the rear view. Mike nodded, too drained to argue. He booked a room, took a shower, and tried to sleep, but his mind kept replaying the image of the hand against the black window, the motionless figure at the roadside. Sleep came in short bursts, haunted by shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. That night, he decided he needed to get back on the road to make up for lost time. He left before sunrise, the empty streets of Oklahoma City giving way to the open plains. Around 1:30 a.m., somewhere near Wichita, Kansas, he saw it again, the figure at the roadside, tall, still, arms hanging loose by its sides. Mike's heart nearly stopped. He tried to swerve around, but this time the figure didn't step aside. He had to brake hard, skidding slightly on the asphalt. Then he heard the sound, a metallic scraping from the left shoulder. He looked and saw the truck, same as before, same blacked-out windows, same rusted cab, moving slowly alongside him, matching his speed without headlights. Mike's pulse raced. He tried to speed up, tried to get away, but the truck stayed beside him, its dark windows like empty sockets staring into his soul. He reached for the CB radio, hoping for some company, but there was only static. He switched channels, calling out for any truckers in the area, but no response. The silence pressed in on him, thick and suffocating. The truck beside him didn't sound like a normal vehicle. The engine was muted, almost whispering, and occasionally he could hear a soft knocking, like fingers tapping against metal. Mike's hands shook on the wheel. He knew he had to escape, but every time he tried to look at the truck directly, it seemed to fade at the edges, almost blending into the darkness. He swerved left and right, but the truck mirrored him, always keeping pace. Panic settled into a cold dread as he realized he was trapped on a long, empty highway with something that shouldn't exist beside him. Hours seemed to stretch like days. The sun was rising, faint streaks of pink and gold brushing the horizon, and the truck began to vanish, slipping away into the shadows like smoke. Mike's hands were raw from gripping the wheel, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. When he finally pulled into a well-lit rest area, he sat in the cab for a long time, trying to calm his shaking heart. He told a few other truckers about what he'd seen, but most laughed, assuming it was just fatigue and desert hallucinations. He wanted to believe that too, but the memory of the hand at the window, the scraping sound, the way the truck mirrored his every move, it was real. Too real. And he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere behind him, just out of sight, something was still following, patient, waiting for nightfall to resume its silent chase. Over the next few weeks, Mike tried to shake it off. He stuck to daytime routes, avoided long stretches of empty highway at night, and even considered leaving the company. But the nightmares followed him. In every shadow, in every darkened window at a truck stop, he saw the tall figure, always silent, always watching. And sometimes, just before dawn, he could hear the faint tap of metal against metal, soft but deliberate, as if someone or something was reminding him it hadn't stopped. One night, after a particularly grueling run through the Texas Panhandle, Mike was parked at a quiet truck stop near Lubbock. The sky was black, the lot empty except for a few rigs. He went inside for a quick snack, and when he came back, he noticed something strange. Fresh tire marks leading from the back of the lot to the highway, uneven and wide, like they belonged to a truck that had no driver, or one that didn't follow the laws of physics. Mike froze. His eyes scanned the darkness, and that's when he saw the figure again. Standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the lights, the wind carried no sound, no warning. The figure was closer than before, and in its stillness it seemed wrong, impossible somehow. The air felt thick, heavy, charged with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. He ran back to his truck, fumbling with the keys, heart pounding. As he climbed in, he caught movement in the mirror, the blacked-out cab sliding silently behind his rig, keeping pace as he tried to start the engine. Mike hit the accelerator, tires screeching, engine roaring, but the truck mirrored him instantly, smooth, effortless, as if mocking his escape. The road stretched ahead endlessly. Daylight was hours away. Mike's mind screamed at him to drive, to keep moving, but exhaustion made his limbs heavy, unresponsive. Somewhere behind, a low, guttural sound began to rise, a mixture of metal scraping, wood cracking, and a faint, almost human whisper. "Mike," it seemed to say, dragging out his name in a chilling, deliberate tone. He tried to respond, tried to rationalize, but no words came. Panic consumed him as he realized that the highway, the emptiness, the night, it wasn't just a backdrop. It was the trap, and he was the prey. The truck behind him gained imperceptibly, tire marks appearing beside his own, as if it was stepping alongside him, waiting for the moment to strike. And then the darkness seemed to bend. The edges of his vision twisted, the asphalt stretching unnaturally, the desert on either side of him melting into shadows that reached for the cab. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, calling his name, promising nothing but terror. Mike slammed his eyes shut, praying, wishing, bargaining, anything to make it stop. When he opened them, the highway was empty. No figure, no blacked-out cab, just the road, endless and silent. His hands were raw on the wheel, tears streaking his dirt-smudged face. He drove for hours, the dawn finally breaking over the plains, but the sense of being followed never left. Every rear-view glance, every shadow at the edge of his vision carried a familiar, suffocating dread. Weeks later, he tried to tell himself it had been a hallucination, a trick of fatigue and loneliness. But then the calls started. Static-filled, whispered voices over the CB radio late at night, always calling his name. Sometimes, when parked at a truck stop, he'd see tire marks he didn't make. Sometimes, the reflection in the rearview mirror would show a shadowy figure, impossibly tall, always silent. Mike quit driving at night. He avoided long stretches of highway, but he couldn't escape it. He knew that somewhere out there, waiting for the darkness, it still followed. Patient, silent, endless. And every time he drove alone, every time the night pressed close, he knew that it was only a matter of time before it reached him again. Story the end. It started out like any other night on the road. The hum of the diesel engine was familiar, almost comforting, as I drove my rig along the I-40 somewhere in eastern Oklahoma. My name's Mike Reynolds, been trucking for over 15 years, and by this point, the road was like an old friend. You think you know the roads, the truck stops, the routes, the rhythm of the night, but then you realize the road has a life of its own, and it can turn on you faster than a jackknife trailer. That night, it was just me and the long stretch of asphalt, the sky overcast and heavy. Rain had been threatening for hours, and now it was finally coming down in sheets, hammering my windshield and making the world outside a blur of neon signs and wet asphalt reflections. I had a load of frozen meat, going from Kansas City down to Dallas, and the dispatcher had been on my ass all day to make time. I hate hauling frozen freight in bad weather. One slip, one jackknife, and you're not getting out without damage to the load or yourself, but you learn to push. I pulled into a truck stop somewhere past Little Rock just as the rain was turning into something worse. A steady, driving downpour that made the parking lot puddles look like shallow lakes. I got out to stretch my legs, the smell of wet asphalt and diesel hanging in the air, and that's when I noticed it. Another truck, older model, blacked out windows, parked about 10 spots down from me. Nothing unusual, except it wasn't running, and there was no one around. Just sitting there, engine off, dark and wet. I shrugged it off and went inside to grab a cup of coffee. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that always makes a trucker uneasy. Not the normal hum of conversation and TV chatter, just quiet. A couple of guys at the counter nodded at me, but no one else was in the diner. I told myself I was just tired, that the long hours and bad weather were making me paranoid. By the time I left, it was well past midnight. I got back in my rig, pulled out, and the rain hadn't let up. The windshield wipers were going at full speed, and I had to slow down to barely 55 to keep control. Somewhere around midnight, I noticed headlights behind me, bright and steady, matching my speed perfectly. Didn't think much of it at first. Trucks on the highway, it happens all the time. But these headlights stayed close, not passing, just tailing me. I checked my mirrors. No plates I could see, no identifying marks, just a big black rig with no lights on except those two headlights. I thought maybe the guy was trying to get my attention, maybe trying to pass, so I slowed down, and still it stayed behind me, close, like it was reading my every move. I decided to take the next exit, hoping to see if he would pass or keep following. My heart started to beat faster, and I felt that prickling sensation in the back of my neck that tells you something's off. When I took the exit, the truck followed. Not on the ramp, not a little behind me. It mirrored me exactly, like some shadow I couldn't shake. I pulled into another truck stop, one I hadn't planned on stopping at. It was smaller, the kind of place where you pay for gas and maybe grab a burger if they have it. I parked at the far end, my rig's lights dimmed, and watched through the wet windshield. The black truck pulled in behind me and stopped, not even bothering to look for a spot, just idling, engine quiet now. I could see a figure inside, but the windows were tinted too dark to make out a face. I got out and went inside. Told the guy at the counter, something weird's going on out there. He didn't even look up, just nodded. Don't worry about it, trucks come and go all night. I didn't buy it. The feeling of being watched had sunk into my bones. When I went back out, the truck was gone, just gone. I didn't see it leave, didn't hear it start. Nothing. My gut told me I should leave, but I needed rest, so I parked in a corner of the lot, left the rig running, and tried to nap. I told myself I was being paranoid. It's easy to convince yourself of that when the rain drums a steady rhythm against the cab. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of something tapping on the trailer. Hard, metallic, but irregular. My first thought was a storm-shaken strap or loose equipment, but then it came again. Tap, 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 louder, closer, coming from the side of the trailer. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. Nothing. Just rain-slick asphalt, my trailer standing quiet, my rig humming softly. I cursed, slammed the door, and leaned against it, trying to shake the nerves. That's when I saw footprints. Heavy, booted footprints pressed into the wet ground, leading from my cab around the trailer to the edge of the lot. And then stopping. Like whoever made them was standing right there, staring at me. No one was there. I checked the lot, walking around, flashlight in hand. No sign of the black truck, no figure, nothing. The prints were gone as if swallowed by the rain. I got back into the cab, locked the doors, and told myself I needed sleep. Just a couple hours, then I'd get back on the road. I woke to the sound of my CB crackling. Static at first, then a voice, deep, slow, distorted. Mike Reynolds. I froze. I didn't answer. The static hissed and then, clearer, the voice again. Mike, why are you alone? I fumbled to push the mic button. Who is this? I asked, my voice shaking. The line went dead. I checked the truck. Everything seemed fine. I told myself I imagined it, that it was interference, maybe someone messing with the CB, but the voice had said my name. My full name. No one on the road would know it. I tried to shake it off, but the unease was sticking. I got back on the highway, keeping a careful eye on the mirrors. Hours passed, the rain easing into a steady drizzle, the sky lightening to gray with the first hint of dawn. I stopped at a small diner to grab coffee and a sandwich. The waitress was young, sleepy-eyed, and when I asked about the road last night, she hesitated, glanced around, and said some trucks, they just shouldn't be on the road at night. I didn't press, didn't ask what she meant, but her eyes told me she knew something I didn't. That afternoon, I made it near Little Rock again, the road dry now, sunlight cutting through the trees along the highway. I stopped at a rest area to stretch. When I walked out, there it was. The black truck parked at the edge, engine off, exactly like before. And this time I saw it clearly, inside, a figure. But it wasn't moving, not breathing, just sitting, staring. I panicked. Ran back to my rig, started the engine, and as I pulled out, the truck followed. Not fast, not close, just behind me, keeping pace. Every exit I took, it mirrored me. Every gas station, it appeared. I called dispatch, hoping to reach someone, anyone. The line crackled and went dead. My phone was dead too, though it had been full earlier. By the time night fell again, I was in Texas, near Amarillo. The truck stayed with me, as always at a distance, never passing. I pulled into a way station, thinking maybe I could lose it there. But as I went inside, the attendant shook his head. "Haven't seen you all day," he said. "And your truck, we didn't see it enter." I froze. The black truck wasn't mentioned. I went back outside, and the lot was empty. My rig was fine. I thought I'd finally lost it. Then the CB crackled again. "Mike, don't stop. Don't look back." I didn't. I drove straight through the night, eyes burning, hands tight on the wheel. Somewhere past Amarillo, I hit a stretch of road with no lights, no signs, just black asphalt stretching into nothing. And that's when it happened. The truck appeared out of the darkness, headlights bright enough to burn my eyes. I swerved, narrowly missing it, tried to accelerate. It didn't move. It wasn't moving. And then I realized it was in two places at once, in the road ahead and in my mirrors behind me. Same size, same shape, same figure inside. I slammed on the brakes. Tires screeched. The truck was gone when I looked, but in the mirrors it was there, inching closer. I threw the rig into a side road, praying for pavement, for something solid. I ended up on a gravel path through farmland, dark, no one around. And then I saw it. Not the truck, the figure, standing on the side of the road, tall, dark, motionless. Not human, but wearing a shape like a man. I hit the gas, tore past it, and it didn't move. I drove like that for hours, back roads, fields, anything to stay moving. By sunrise, I reached a small town. Police station. I ran inside, told them everything. They looked at me like I was insane. "We haven't had reports of any trucks like that," one officer said. "You need rest, son. You've been on the road too long." I tried to show them my route, my logs. They were all normal. My truck, nothing unusual, except the scratches. Fresh, deep scratches along the passenger side of my trailer. Not mine. Not from the road. Something had clawed it. I quit the job after that. The dispatcher called, but I couldn't answer. My truck was parked in a yard, waiting for my return, but I never went back. Some nights, though, I wake up to the sound of a diesel engine, far away, rhythmic, humming, like it's following me, calling my name. I look outside. Never anything. But I know it's there, somewhere on the highways, and waiting for the next trucker who's alone, who's tired, who thinks the road is safe. You never really shake it off. The memory, the sound, the headlights, the figure in the black truck, it sticks with you. And you start to wonder, is it the road that's alive or something on it? Years later, I hear stories from other drivers, truckers who have been on the same stretch of I-40. They talk about a black rig, headlights on at night, following, never passing, always watching. Sometimes they call it a ghost, sometimes a demon, sometimes just bad luck. Me? I don't call it anything. I just stay off the highways after dark, and I warn anyone who will listen, never, ever let your guard down on the road. Some things don't belong to this world, and they know your name. Even now, when I hear a truck at night, headlights cutting through the fog, I can't help but look, but it's never there. Still, I know. It's out there, waiting, watching. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I rolled my rig off the I-40 somewhere outside Little Rock, Arkansas. The highway stretched endlessly into the darkness, a ribbon of asphalt slick with the recent rain, reflective like a mirror catching every flicker of my headlights. I'd been on the road for nearly 16 hours straight, barely feeling my eyelids threatening to close. Coffee wasn't touching the edge of my fatigue anymore. It was more of a ritual, a desperate attempt to stay connected to some semblance of consciousness. I had a full load to deliver in Memphis by sunrise, but the road had a way of messing with even the most seasoned drivers, especially on nights like this. I passed a rest stop sign and felt that familiar tug of desperation, the gnawing urge to shut down for a while, to let the body breathe. But I kept going. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, and deep down, I knew the dark stretches of this highway could get weird. I'd heard the stories before, whispered between drivers over CB radios, the truckers who claimed they'd seen figures on the roadside, strange hitchhikers that disappeared when you blinked, abandoned vehicles with people inside that weren't really there. I laughed it off, at least I thought I did. Those were just stories. Yet, the further I drove, the more I felt a prickling along the back of my neck, like something was watching me. The first hint that something wasn't right came when my radio flickered. I keep it on to listen to trucker chatter and sometimes country music to stay awake, but the static that overtook the signal made me uneasy. It wasn't a normal static. It was rhythmic, almost like a tapping. I paused, listening. There it was again. Tap, 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 like someone was drumming their fingernails on the dashboard. I slammed my hand over the radio, muttering to myself, but the tapping didn't stop. I shook it off and tried to focus on the road, telling myself I was just tired, that the highway was playing tricks on me. I glanced at my mirrors. Nothing. The rain had stopped for a few miles, leaving a thick, low fog rolling over the asphalt. It clung to the trees lining the sides of the road like a wet shroud, muffling every sound except for my tires humming against the wet pavement. Then I saw it, or thought I did. A figure standing on the shoulder, illuminated by my high beams. I slammed on the brakes instinctively. My heart jumped into my throat. The figure wasn't moving. It was a man, or maybe a man, but his face was obscured, the shadows hiding every detail. My first instinct was to swerve around him, but something in me froze. The way he stood, too still, unnaturally upright, like a mannequin left by the roadside. I passed him slowly, staring out the side mirror. Then I blinked. When I looked again, he was gone. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself I needed a break, that I needed sleep. I pulled into a small gas station that was still open, half hoping to see some other truckers, anyone to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. The lot was empty except for a few rusted cars and a faded sign swinging slightly in the breeze. I climbed out, the cold night air cutting through my jacket. Something felt off immediately. The silence wasn't the usual quiet of a late-night stop. It was heavy, oppressive, like the night itself was pressing in on me. I went inside to grab a coffee, and that's when I noticed the clerk, or what I assumed was a clerk. He was an older man, thin, hunched over, with a face pale enough to make me do a double take. But it wasn't his appearance that unsettled me. It was the eyes. His eyes were too dark, too hollow, like pits you could fall into. He didn't look at me when I walked in. He didn't blink. He just stared ahead, mouth slightly open, making no attempt to greet me. "Coffee," I said, keeping my voice steady. He nodded once, slowly, mechanically. I noticed the shaking in his hands as he poured the hot water. But the thing that made my stomach knot was that I could see the reflection of my own face in the coffee machine behind the counter, and I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the reflection, there was someone or something standing just over my shoulder. I whipped around. Empty. The clerk handed me the coffee without a word, and I took it with a shaky hand. I didn't wait to ask anything else. I just went back to my truck, the hairs on my arms standing straight up. The night was thicker now, the fog denser, and the air felt wet against my skin. I got back on the highway, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, a hallucination born of fatigue. About 45 minutes down the road, I noticed my GPS acting strangely. I had it set to the usual route to Memphis, but it kept recalculating, rerouting me back onto roads I hadn't intended to take. One stretch of asphalt was lined with trees so close that they practically blocked the headlights, their branches clawing at the edges of the cab. That's when I saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder, engine running, lights off. A big rig, but old, rusted, its trailer looking like it hadn't carried a load in years. No driver in sight. My gut twisted. Something about it screamed wrong. Against my better judgment, I slowed down to pass, and then I saw movement in the cab. Someone, or something, was sitting in the driver's seat. Its head turned slowly to look directly at me. I slammed on the accelerator, trying to put distance between us, but in the rear view, I saw the truck start moving. Not accelerating, just following. My heart hammering, I swerved, taking the next exit, but every time I looked in the mirror, there it was. The same truck, moving as if it had a mind of its own. I tried calling dispatch, even the police, but my phone had no signal. And every time I glanced at the gauges in my cab, the lights on the dashboard flickered, as if the truck itself was alive, pulsing with some unseen rhythm. By now I was shaking uncontrollably, tears mixing with the sweat on my face. The road twisted unnaturally, as if it had no real pattern. Landmarks I recognized disappeared, replaced by stretches of black forest. And then I saw them. Figures on the roadside, dozens of them, standing perfectly still, their faces hidden. But I knew they were watching me. I could feel it. My hands tightened on the wheel so hard that my knuckles bled. The truck behind me honked once, a long, low, guttural sound that didn't belong to any human driver. My rig felt alive, trembling, and I realized I couldn't outrun it. My only choice was to confront it. I veered off the road onto a dirt path, hoping to lose it, praying that the narrow route would be impossible for a big rig. But the other truck followed, silently now, gliding over the dirt like it had no weight. I ran out of options and pulled into what looked like an abandoned warehouse lot. Rusted equipment littered the ground, shadows hiding every corner. I parked, cut the engine, and sat in silence, listening. The other truck came to a stop behind me, and then slowly I heard a knock. Tap, tap, tap on my door. I didn't move. My breath caught in my throat. The tapping continued, methodical, deliberate. I tried the radio again. Nothing but that same rhythmic static. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shadow of the cab door opening. The air turned cold, the smell of damp earth and oil filling the cab. I wanted to scream, to bolt, but I couldn't. It was like my body had been frozen by some invisible hand. And then it leaned in. Not a human lean, not natural, but bending in ways a person shouldn't. Its face, if it could be called that, was a blur, constantly shifting, as if made of shadows and smoke, and it whispered, not words, just a low, vibrating hum that seemed to crawl under my skin. Hours must have passed. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed. When I finally dared to move, the truck was gone. The night had returned to its normal quiet, the fog dissipated, and the highway ahead looked like the road I knew. I should have driven straight to Memphis, called the cops, told someone. But I didn't. Something had changed in me. The stories the other drivers told weren't just stories. The figures, the trucks, the endless road, they were real. And they were waiting. I've been back on the road since, sometimes taking that I-40 stretch out of instinct, out of curiosity. Always at night, always alone, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of that truck in the distance, or the pale, hollow eyes of a figure standing where no one should be. I've never stopped driving, but I don't sleep anymore. Not really. The night has a way of finding you when you're alone on the highway, and if you stare too long into the darkness stares back, following you, waiting. I know now that the road doesn't belong to me. Not really. It belongs to them. And every mile I put between myself and the city, every mile of asphalt under my tires, I feel them behind me, patient, watching, moving silently, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. It's been weeks since that night. I've tried to tell a few other truckers, but they laugh it off, thinking I'm joking or losing my mind. Maybe I am. Maybe it was all exhaustion and paranoia. But sometimes when the highway stretches long and empty, I swear I can hear the tapping again. Tap, 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 always behind me, somewhere just out of sight, reminding me that the road is alive and that it never forgets the ones who wander alone in the dark. I don't know what follows me or why. All I know is that once you've seen it, the eyes in the reflection, the truck that shouldn't move, you can't unsee it, and you can't escape it. Some nights when the fog rolls in thick, I see the figures in the distance, standing in perfect rows, waiting for the next trucker to wander too far from the safety of the city lights. I try not to look too long. I try to keep driving, keep moving, keep the tires humming against the blacktop. But deep down, I know they are always there. Watching, waiting. And one day I might not be able to outrun them. Every night on the road since then, I hear it. The faint, low hum of the engine behind me, the tapping on the doors, the shifting shadows in the mirrors. I've stopped sleeping, stopped resting, because I know if I do, even for a moment, they'll take me, and I can't let them. I don't know who they are or what they want. Maybe it's not about want at all. Maybe it's just about the road, the highway, the endless night that stretches beyond human understanding. But I know one thing. I've been marked. Once you've crossed paths with them, once you've seen the shadow of that other truck in the distance, you're never truly alone on the road again. I still drive. I still make deliveries. But the nights are different now. The darkness feels thicker. The fog clings closer. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch the reflection of a face in the rearview that isn't mine. Hollow eyes, shifting features, a reminder that the highway never forgets, never forgives. I know they're out there, waiting, watching. And one day, I fear they'll catch up. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I rolled onto the interstate near a stretch of highway in rural Kansas. I had been driving for hours, the cab of my rig vibrating with the low hum of the engine, the road stretching endlessly under the dull glare of my headlights. The radio was off, my only company the soft whistle of the wind outside and the rhythmic bump of tires against the worn asphalt. I was alone, just me and my 18-wheeler, hauling a load of electronics across the Midwest. I've driven this route dozens of times, enough to know the exits, the rest stops, the lonely stretches where trucks disappear into the night, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. I had just passed a small blinking sign for a rest area when something in my peripheral vision made me slow down. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, standing at the edge of the highway, thumb extended, frozen under the weak yellow glow of a street lamp. I never pick up hitchhikers, Not out of fear of the law or even safety, but because I've been doing this long enough to know that things on the side of the road at 2 in the morning are rarely what they seem. Still, something about him, or it, caught my attention. He was tall, unnaturally so, and thin, with his arms hanging way too long, almost brushing the ground. His head was tilted slightly, cocked to one side like he was listening to something only he could hear. I blinked and looked again, and he was gone. Just vanished. I chalked it up to exhaustion. I hadn't had a proper meal in 12 hours, and the monotony of the interstate had my mind playing tricks. I kept driving, radio still off, headlights cutting through the dark, when I noticed something strange. The trucks around me had thinned out. Usually, even at this hour, there'd be a few rigs in sight, but now, for miles, the highway was empty. I rolled down the window, letting the cold night air hit my face. It smelled faintly metallic, like rust and old machinery, and for a moment I thought maybe my brakes were overheating or my engine was about to give out. I shook my head and turned my attention back to the road. Then I saw the first one. A car, or what looked like a car, was on the shoulder, headlights off, facing the wrong way. Its shape was distorted, bent almost as if it had been crushed or warped. I slowed down, curious despite the unease that was crawling up my spine. As I passed, I noticed the windshield was completely blacked out. There was no reflection, no glass, nothing to indicate anyone was inside. I kept driving, trying to tell myself it was just a freak accident, a wrecked car left on the side of the road. But then, in my mirror, I saw something that made my stomach turn cold. The car was following me, not on the road itself, just sliding along the shoulder, moving faster than it should have been able to. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, heart pounding, and looked in the rearview mirror again. It was gone. I took the next exit, planning to stop at a diner and get coffee, maybe shake off whatever was happening. As I turned off the interstate, I noticed the same hitchhiker from earlier, standing under a street lamp at the ramp. Only now he was closer, almost directly in my path. I hit the horn, but he didn't move. He didn't even flinch. I didn't stop. I gunned the engine, merging back onto the highway. I dared not look back again until the glow of the exit faded behind me. But the sense of being watched didn't fade. Every time I glanced in the mirrors, I felt it, something just beyond my sight. Always there, but never fully visible. I reached the next truck stop, a grimy little place with flickering lights and a smell of old diesel and fried food. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed and stung my eyes, and the place was empty except for the cashier, a middle-aged man with hollow eyes who didn't look up when I ordered coffee. He handed me a cup with a thin paper sleeve and muttered, "You shouldn't have seen that." "What?" I asked, confused. He shook his head. "Nothing you can explain. Just drive carefully." I laughed it off, even though my gut said not to. I spent 20 minutes there, drinking the coffee, trying to calm down. Eventually, I got back on the road, telling myself I was imagining things, that fatigue and the monotony of the night were messing with me. But I was wrong. It started with the signs. Every mile marker, every billboard, every exit sign seemed wrong. Letters shifted when I blinked. Words didn't make sense. One billboard for a motel that I knew well had a phone number that wasn't a number at all, just a jumble of letters. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was seeing things. But no matter how many times I looked, it didn't change. Then came the sound. At first, it was faint, a scraping like metal on concrete. I turned the cab's lights up, checked my mirrors, but there was nothing. Still, the sound grew louder, closer, until I could hear it clearly inside the cab, echoing through the metal frame of the truck. I slammed on the brakes again. That's when I saw it. On the shoulder, moving impossibly fast, was a figure. Not human, not fully. It had a shape like a person, but it stretched and writhed, limbs bending in ways that made no sense. Its head spun as I watched, a grotesque imitation of human motion. It was gaining on me. I floored the accelerator, weaving in and out of lanes, but the figure matched my every move. Trucks swerved around me, other drivers staring but doing nothing, frozen in place like mannequins. The figure's eyes, or what I assumed were eyes, glowed faintly red, and it laughed, a wet, gurgling sound that made bile rise in my throat. I remember thinking, this is it. I'm going to die on this highway in the middle of nowhere. I don't know how I survived what happened next. There's a section of the interstate that cuts through a patch of forest. The trees hang low over the road, branches scraping the roof of the cab. I took the exit and drove into it, hoping the darkness would hide me. It did. For a few minutes, anyway. I slowed, thinking maybe I could shake whatever it was, but then I saw the eyes again. 2 pinpricks of red floating in the black. And then, suddenly, the sound of whispers filled the cab. Not one voice, but many, layered over each other, chanting my name, name. I slammed my hands on the wheel, trying to block it out, but the voices grew louder, angrier. Then the figure appeared inside the cab. I know it sounds impossible, but it did. My peripheral vision caught movement before I dared to look directly. And when I did, I saw it. Tall, skeletal, limbs bending in impossible angles, eyes glowing red, grinning with a mouth full of teeth that shouldn't exist. It leaned over me, and I could feel its breath on my neck, icy and wet. I blacked out. When I came to, I was parked at another truck stop, miles from where I remembered being. My rig was fine, no damage, no sign of struggle, but I was soaked in sweat, shaking uncontrollably, heart racing. I checked the dashboard. The time was 4 hours ahead of what I remembered, 4 hours gone. No memory of driving, no memory of anything in between. I told myself it was a nightmare, a hallucination, something caused by exhaustion. I spent the next week trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the road, but then I started noticing the signs. Letters shifting on billboards, words that made no sense, shadows moving where they shouldn't, and worst of all, the figure. I see it sometimes in mirrors, in reflections, always just at the edge of sight. Not quite human, not quite not, always watching. I stopped taking my usual routes, sticking to populated highways and interstates, but the feeling never goes away. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the cab at night, I hear it whisper my name, soft and wet, promising it's not finished. I know it will come back. It always does. I still drive. I have to. It's the only thing I know. But every night when the sun goes down and the road stretches out into black, I remember that stretch of Kansas highway, the tall figure with limbs that shouldn't exist, the laughter that made my blood run cold. And I know no matter how fast I drive, it's out there, waiting, watching. Every trucker has a story they never tell. Most of us chalk things up to fatigue, stress, the long, lonely hours behind the wheel. I used to think that too. But now I know the truth. There are things on the road that are older, stranger, and far more patient than us. They wait for the night, they wait for the lonely stretches, and they follow. And no matter how far you drive, no matter how fast, some things never let go. The thing is, I don't know if it's tied to the highway or to me. I've stopped at every rest area, every diner, every truck stop along my routes, hoping it's just a local phenomenon. But it's not. Once it finds you, it follows. I've had trucks behind me at night, shadows in the mirrors that move against the laws of physics, whispers in the cab when I'm the only one there. I've tried everything, coffee, music, company, ignoring it, but nothing works. Sometimes, when the highway is empty, I see it again in the distance. Just a tall shadow, limbs too long, moving faster than it should. And I know, even before it gets close, that I'm going to be haunted again. Every trucker knows the fear of the dark road. But this isn't ordinary fear. This is knowing something is out there that doesn't belong, that doesn't rest, and that has no intention of letting you go. I've started carrying a camera now, hoping to catch it to prove it exists. But every picture comes out blank. Shadows where it should be, nothing else. I've spoken to other drivers, tried to share what I've seen, and they look at me like I'm insane, telling me it's fatigue, dehydration, stress. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I still feel it sometimes in the back of my mind, a weight on my chest, the icy whisper of breath against my neck when the cab is empty. I drive with one hand on the wheel, the other gripping a knife now. I don't know why. I don't think it can be harmed by anything we know. But I have to do something, and I drive. Because stopping means it catches up, somehow. It always does. Some nights, when the road is empty and the wind is low, I see headlights behind me, perfectly still, like they're waiting for me. Sometimes I glance in the rear view, hoping not to see anything, and I do. Always just at the edge, always just long enough to remind me I'm not alone. I don't know how long I can keep doing this. I don't know if there's a way to stop it, a way to outrun it. All I know is that every mile, every dark stretch of road, every lonely hour behind the wheel, it's there, waiting, patient, unstoppable, and someday I know it will catch me. Story the end. It started like any other week on the road. I'd been driving trucks for over 12 years, mostly hauling freight across the Midwest and out toward the plains of Texas and Kansas. I'd seen my share of bad weather, tight squeezes, and sketchy truck stops, but nothing had ever really rattled me until that week in late October. I was rolling out of Joliet, Illinois, late at night, pulling a refrigerated trailer loaded with frozen goods. The highways were slick with rain, and the headlights of passing cars cut through the dark like knives. I had the radio on, low, mostly for company. There was a faint hum in the truck, the usual vibrations from the trailer hitting potholes, nothing unusual. The first few hours were routine. I stopped in a rest area near Peoria, stretched my legs, grabbed a cup of lukewarm coffee, and noticed the sky had grown darker, almost unnaturally so. It wasn't just nighttime. It was like the clouds had swallowed the stars. I had a delivery in Amarillo, Texas, and it was supposed to be a simple overnight run. I got back in the cab, and that's when I started noticing small things. Shadows that didn't belong. I chalked it up to fatigue at first. My eyes wandered to the rearview mirror, and I swear I saw a figure standing by the side of the highway for a split second, then gone. My hands tightened on the wheel. I'd driven enough to know when something was off, and this didn't feel right. Hours later, I was somewhere near Springfield, Missouri, rain still hammering the windshield. That's when my CB crackled with static. I rarely use the CB anymore, but tonight I was glad I did. "Driver, you see it too?" I froze. The voice was low, distorted, almost like it was coming through layers of static. "Who's this?" I asked, gripping the wheel. "Don't turn around," the voice said. Just like that, the static cut out. My stomach sank. I told myself it was a prank, maybe some kid on a channel I shouldn't have been on. But it didn't feel like that. It felt personal. I tried to focus on the road, keeping my speed steady, but every mile seemed longer than the last. The rain slowed, but the clouds above looked heavier, darker. And then, out of nowhere, a car appeared in my mirror. Not behind me, beside me. A black sedan, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I sped up slightly. The car matched my speed. No headlights, no taillights. Just a black blur next to my cab. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. Just my rig and the rain-slicked asphalt stretching behind me. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Empty. My pulse was hammering. I told myself it was exhaustion, seeing things in the reflection of wet roads. But when I focused ahead, the highway seemed different. The lines weren't right. I'd been on this stretch dozens of times, and the curves weren't like this. By the time I got to the outskirts of Branson, the CB crackled again. "Don't stop. Don't look back." This time, the voice was closer, like it was whispering directly into my ear through the static. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, and the trailer jackknifed slightly. My hands shook. I hadn't eaten all day, barely slept, but the fear in me wasn't fatigue. It was something else. Something ancient, patient, and aware of me. The black sedan was there again, in the distance this time, just at the edge of my vision. No matter how I moved, it was always behind me, not chasing, not leading, just there, watching, waiting. I called the dispatcher in Dallas, hoping to sound rational. "Hey, I think someone's following me." There was a pause on the line. "Who's following you, John?" the dispatcher asked. I hesitated. I wanted to say it was a car, but there was something wrong. Not a normal car, not a normal person. Something I couldn't explain. "Just a car," I said finally. "Black, no lights. It keeps showing up in my mirrors." "John, it's just you out there. Highway's empty." But I knew it wasn't empty. By the time I reached the Missouri-Arkansas border, night had fully fallen. The storm had passed, leaving a heavy, suffocating fog that clung to the highway. Visibility was barely 50 feet. My headlights cut through the white haze, but I felt like I was being watched from all sides. My mirrors showed nothing, but I knew the car was there. I didn't need to see it to know. Somewhere near Fayetteville, I had to pull into a rest stop. My nerves were shot. I parked, left the truck running, and went inside. The place was empty, deserted except for the faint sound of dripping water. And that's when I saw it. A man, or something that looked like a man, sitting at the far end of the building. No features, just a dark silhouette, hunched, rocking slightly, watching me. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my legs refused to move. It didn't blink, didn't breathe audibly. It just existed. I told myself it was a hallucination, sleep-deprived paranoia. I went back to the truck, tried to shake it off, but when I climbed back into the cab, I saw handprints on the outside of the trailer. Smudged, wet-looking, but I hadn't touched the trailer since I parked. My heart rate spiked. I started driving again, faster this time. The voice on the CB came again. You can't stop. You can't hide. You belong to us now. I almost lost it. I wanted to throw the radio out the window, but I didn't dare. The trailer shook violently as if it was alive, responding to the fear radiating from me. The highway twisted unnaturally, roads I didn't recognize leading me into deep Arkansas backcountry. I passed old barns, abandoned gas stations, and miles of nothing. No traffic, no signs, no civilization, just fog, trees, and the relentless pressure in the air. By the time I crossed into Oklahoma, exhaustion was catching up. My eyes burned, my arms ached, and the voice had stopped for a while. But the feeling never left. Something was riding with me in the cab, just out of sight. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes moving in the back mirrors, shapes that weren't reflections. I tried to stop at another rest area near Tulsa, but when I pulled in, the lights flickered. I didn't see anyone at first. Then I saw the man again. No face, just blackness where a face should have been, leaning against my truck. I froze. I couldn't breathe, and then it was gone, as if it had never been there. Sleep was impossible. I tried calling my wife, friends, anyone, but the phone lines were dead, cell service gone. Even the GPS refused to work, as if the truck had become untethered from reality itself. So by the time I hit northern Texas, something changed. The black sedan was no longer a blur. I could see it clearly. It wasn't a car in any conventional sense. The paint was black, sure, but the body was malformed. It twisted slightly, as if it were breathing. The tires didn't turn, but it moved with me, keeping pace effortlessly. Inside, shadows shifted like smoke, and I could see faces forming and dissolving in the darkness. I tried everything, speeding up, slowing down, taking exits, driving into small towns, but it always found me. The CB voice returned, closer, clearer, almost tender in tone. You're ours. You've always been ours. You just didn't know it yet. The trailer started to vibrate violently, cargo shifting, freezing my hands on the wheel. My mind was screaming. I pulled over onto a dirt shoulder and tried to abandon the rig. My legs moved mechanically, like I was a puppet. But as soon as I opened the door, I felt it. Cold, like the inside of a freezer, seeping into my bones. The black sedan was right there. No sound, no movement, but I could feel it watching, judging, deciding. I ran back into the cab. I didn't even lock the door. I didn't have time. The steering wheel felt heavier, the trailer heavier, the road different. Not asphalt anymore. It was like I was driving on something organic, pulsing, breathing, watching. I remember seeing lights in the distance, the delivery location, Amarillo. But the miles between were no longer consistent with time or space. Hours passed, maybe minutes. I had no sense of anything. Every turn, every mile, the black sedan was there, morphing, closer. And the CB kept speaking, always whispering, always patient. By the time I reached Amarillo, the sun was coming up, weak and sickly behind thick clouds. I pulled into the warehouse yard, my truck shaking, my hands numb. The doors open, people milling about, completely normal. They looked at me like I was crazy when I asked if anyone else saw the black sedan, if anyone else heard the voice. No one had. No one cared. The truck looked normal, light, the cargo intact. Nothing had changed. I left that day pretending it was just a long, bad night. But ever since then, I know it's still out there, somewhere on the highways. Watching. Waiting. Every time I pass a dark stretch, I catch a glimpse in my mirrors, just for a second, a black silhouette, always behind me. And sometimes if the CB is on, I swear I hear it again. See you soon. I keep driving because stopping isn't an option, and I never, ever drive alone. Story the end. I'd been on the road for most of my life, it felt like. Long-haul trucking isn't something you get into because you love comfort. It's long hours, bad food, and a whole lot of time alone with your thoughts. I was used to it, though. The road became more familiar than any home I'd ever had. I'd been driving since my 20s, and by the time this happened, I was pushing 45. You learn a lot about the road and yourself in that span. You learn where to stop for decent coffee, what truck stops to avoid, and what states are worse than others for weighing stations and DOT inspections. But nothing in those years prepared me for what I ran into that night. It was late September, hot during the day, but cool once the sun dipped below the horizon. I had a load of automotive parts I was taking from Ohio down to Dallas. The dispatcher had me running through Arkansas to shave time, and I didn't mind. I'd been through those roads before. They could get lonely, long stretches of highway with trees pressing in from both sides, but I'd never had trouble. You roll your window down, keep the CB chatter going, maybe throw on some old rock stations if you can get a signal, and it's manageable. That night, though, I didn't have chatter. My CB was quiet. Too quiet. A lot of guys don't bother with it anymore, and that silence just made me feel more cut off. By around midnight, I was somewhere south of Little Rock, cruising down an isolated stretch. The moon was out, but clouds kept swallowing it, throwing the woods around me into deep shadow. My headlights cut a clean path ahead, reflecting against the occasional road sign. But otherwise, it felt like I was hauling through a tunnel made of trees. I hadn't seen another vehicle for a good 30 minutes when my low fuel light came on. I swore under my breath. I wasn't exactly running on fumes, but I needed to top off soon. I pulled out my phone to check for the next truck stop, but the signal was garbage. 1 bar, then none. Out here, you can't rely on your phone. I told myself I'd keep pushing. Something would come up. Something always does. Sure enough, maybe 20 minutes later, I saw a faded sign half hidden by vines and brush. It wasn't one of the bright reflective dot signs, just a wooden board with peeling paint. It read, "Fuel, food, 3 miles." The arrow pointed down an exit ramp that looked like it hadn't been resurfaced in years. My gut told me it wasn't going to be Love's or Pilot or any of the bigger chains. More likely some old mom and pop place barely keeping afloat. But I needed diesel, and I wasn't about to chance another 30 miles with the gauge dipping low. I took the exit. The ramp was narrow, cracked, with weeds poking through the asphalt. My headlights swung across the trees as I curved down, and soon I was on a 2-lane road with no streetlights. The 3 miles stretched out longer than it felt like it should have, and just as I was about to turn back, a flicker of neon appeared through the branches ahead. It was a gas station, sure enough. The sign buzzed with red neon letters spelling gas and diner. Half of the letters were dead, so it just read GDNE. There were 2 old pumps out front, the kind I hadn't seen in years. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, casting sickly yellow light on cracked pavement. The diner was attached to the station, windows dark except for one flickering bulb inside. I eased my rig into the lot, careful with the narrow space. No other vehicles were around, no sign of life except for the weak glow inside the diner. I shut off the engine, the silence pressing in heavy. I got out and stretched, my boots crunching on gravel. The night air was cooler here, but it felt stale, like the air in a room that hadn't been opened in a while. I walked to the pump, looked it over. It was so old I wasn't sure it would even take my card. There was no keypad, no screen, just a slot for bills and a lever. I cursed under my breath again, realizing I'd have to go inside. The diner door creaked when I opened it. The smell hit me first, a mix of stale grease, dust, and something faintly metallic, like rust. The place looked frozen in time. Vinyl booths with cracks in the cushions lined the windows, and a counter with round stools ran along the far wall. Behind it, shelves of old snacks, faded soda cans, and a register sat under a yellowing ceiling fan that turned slowly. At first, I thought the place was empty. Then I saw him. A man stood behind the counter, half in shadow. He looked to be in his 50s, tall, with thinning hair combed straight back. He wore a grease-stained aprons, and his eyes caught mine as soon as I stepped in. They were pale, almost gray, and didn't blink enough. "Need fuel?" he asked, voice flat but carrying. "Yeah," I said, forcing a polite tone. "Truck out front." He didn't answer right away, just stared. Then he nodded slowly. "Pump still works? Takes cash." I had some bills on me, thankfully. I pulled out a couple of 20s, handed them over. His fingers brushed mine, ice cold, too cold for a man standing indoors. "How much you putting in?" he asked. 40, I said. He rang it into an ancient register with a ding. "Pump 2. I started to turn when he spoke again. "Diner's open, if you're hungry." I wasn't, not really, but something in his tone wasn't inviting. It was more like an order dressed up as hospitality. I forced a smile, maybe after I fuel up. Outside, I slid the bills into the pump and pulled the lever. To my relief, diesel trickled out. It was slow, way slower than modern pumps, but it worked. I stood there in the buzzing yellow light, watching the numbers turn on the little mechanical counter. Every few seconds, I looked back at the diner window. The man was still there, standing perfectly still behind the glass, staring at me. When I finished, I locked the tank and climbed back into the cab. My first thought was just to go, hit the road, and put this weird little pit stop behind me. But when I turned the key, the engine didn't catch. I frowned, tried again. Nothing, just a dry click. My truck had been running smooth all night. There was no reason it shouldn't start. I checked gauges, flipped the battery switch, even popped the hood. Everything looked fine, but the starter wouldn't catch. My chest tightened, the lot was too quiet, the shadows too deep. I glanced toward the diner. The man was gone. I didn't want to go back in there, but I didn't have a choice. I walked across the lot again, boots crunching louder this time, like the night was amplifying every sound. The diner door creaked when I opened it again. The man wasn't behind the counter anymore. Instead, he was sitting in one of the booths, hands folded on the table, watching me. "Truck won't start," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded once, slowly. "Happens out here." I waited for him to offer help, tools, a jump, anything. He didn't, just stared. "Is there a tow nearby?" I asked. Another long pause. "Not this time of night. Closest one's 40 miles. I rubbed the back of my neck, glancing around the diner. That metallic smell was stronger now. My eyes fell on the kitchen door behind the counter. It was propped open a crack, and I thought I saw movement in there, shadows shifting. "You want coffee?" the man asked suddenly. "No," I said. "I just need to figure out the truck." His lips twitched like he was trying to smile, but forgot how. "Coffee helps." Something about the way he said it made my stomach knot. I backed toward the door. "I'll check the engine again." He didn't stop me, just kept watching. I stepped outside, breathing hard. The air was colder now, damp, like fog was rolling in, though I hadn't seen any. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and tried the ignition again. Still nothing. That was when I saw them. In the side mirror, shapes moved at the tree line. Not animals, not quite human either. Figures, pale and thin, standing just beyond the reach of the street lamp. I counted at least 4, maybe 5. They weren't walking toward me. They were just standing there, angled toward the diner. My heart pounded. I tried the ignition again, desperation in my chest. Click. Nothing. I looked back at the diner. The man was at the window again, his pale eyes locked on me. Behind him, through the crack of the kitchen door, something else moved, taller than him, broader, but wrong in its proportions. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with a broken-down truck or some weird old gas station. Something was wrong here. Deeply, terrifyingly wrong. And I was stuck. Would you like me to continue the full story until it reaches at least 4,500 words in one continuous disturbing narrative that ends with "story the end"? The road is a strange place when you live most of your life on it. I've been a trucker for over 20 years, and I can tell you with certainty that it's not just fatigue, weather, or reckless drivers that'll get you. It's the people. There are things you come across on long hauls that stick with you forever, even when you wish they wouldn't. I had one of those runs back in 2013, hauling out of Nevada down toward New Mexico, and it still makes my skin crawl to this day. I left Reno late afternoon, pulling a flatbed loaded with construction equipment. The company I was contracted for had me on a schedule that was tight, and I planned to run through most of the night. I fueled up, checked everything over, and started down the highway. The desert stretches out endless once you leave the city lights behind. Flat, barren, nothing but the horizon and the glow of your headlights. At first it feels freeing, but after hours it becomes suffocating. You start to realize just how alone you are out there. Somewhere after midnight, east of Tonopah, I noticed the first thing that felt off. A car, maybe 20 yards behind me, following steady. Normally, four-wheelers pass us rigs at the first chance they get, but this one stayed behind me. Every time I'd change lanes, he did too. After 10 miles, it had me watching my mirrors more than the road ahead. I keyed up the CB, asked if anyone else was out near 95 South, but it was dead silent. No chatter, no jokes, nothing. Finally, after another couple of miles, the car drifted into the other lane and pulled up alongside me. It was a dark sedan, windows tinted. I glanced over, expecting to see some kid or maybe someone on their phone, but the driver's side window was rolled down and I saw the face inside. It wasn't right. The skin looked too pale, stretched tight like paper. The eyes were wide and staring, not blinking. The driver, if you could call it that, turned his head slowly toward me, and the corners of his mouth stretched into this grin. A long, unnatural grin that made the hair on my arms stand up. He never broke eye contact. He just grinned. I snapped my eyes back to the road and floored it, my rig straining as I pushed faster than I normally would. The sedan stayed even with me for a few seconds, then dropped back. I didn't look again until I was sure it was gone. When I finally dared glance at my mirrors, the road behind me was empty. I kept going, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. By the time I reached a rest area, I was wired but bone-tired, and I figured I'd stop for a quick nap in the cab. I pulled into the farthest end of the lot, shut down, and leaned back in the driver's seat. The night was quiet, just crickets and the occasional hiss of a cooling engine from another rig. I was drifting when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching on gravel outside my truck. I froze, not daring to move. The sound circled the cab once, then stopped at my driver's side door. I strained to listen, and after a few seconds there was this faint scratching, like fingernails dragging down the metal. I reached for the flashlight I kept by my seat and snapped it on, shining it out the window. Nothing. No one there. Just the empty lot and shadows stretching long under the lights. I thought maybe it was my brain playing tricks on me from lack of sleep, so I killed the light and settled back again. That's when I heard the breathing. Not mine, someone else's. Shallow, ragged, right outside the cab. Then, slow as death itself, a whisper. "Open up." My heart slammed so hard I thought it'd tear through my chest. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then I caught it. A reflection in the side mirror, a face, too pale, too wide-eyed, grinning at me through the glass. The same one from the sedan. I fired up the engine, so fast I damn near flooded it, slammed into gear, and peeled out of that lot, gravel spitting behind me. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just drove until the sun came up and I hit Albuquerque. By then I was so strung out on fear and lack of sleep that my dispatcher chewed me out for being late. But I didn't care. For weeks after, I couldn't shake it. Every time I tried to sleep in the cab, I'd hear phantom scratching or footsteps. I avoided rest areas altogether, preferring the safety of brightly lit truck stops no matter how far off route they were. I started carrying a tire iron in the cab, like that would have done anything against whatever the hell I saw. I told a couple of other drivers about it months later, careful not to sound crazy, and one old-timer just nodded slow. "You saw him too, huh?" he said. My stomach turned cold. He went on to tell me there were stories. Truckers seeing a pale man with a grin out on lonely stretches of road, usually at night, sometimes in a car, sometimes just standing on the shoulder. Folks who stopped or lingered too long near him, they didn't always make it home. I don't know if what I saw was human, ghost, or something else entirely, but I know this. The desert has things in it that don't belong. Things that watch, that follow, that wait for you to let your guard down. And sometimes when I'm out on another run through those empty stretches, I catch myself checking the mirrors more than I should, praying I don't see that sedan again, or that face grinning at me through the glass. Story the end. It was a clear but moonless night somewhere along US 50, the stretch of Nevada they call the loneliest road in America. My load was nothing special, pallets of building supplies headed for a warehouse outside Sacramento. But I'd been driving since early morning, and the silence of the desert at night always put me on edge. I'd driven this route dozens of times before, but that night there was something different in the air, a kind of stillness that didn't feel natural. No radio signal, no other trucks, not even the faint glow of far-off towns, just black asphalt and the whisper of my tires. I caught movement in my mirrors around 1 a.m., headlights far behind, small at first but growing larger. That alone wasn't unusual. People drive fast through the desert. But the way the lights moved was off. They swerved ever so slightly, like whoever was behind the wheel wasn't entirely sober. I adjusted my speed, hoping they'd pass. Instead, the lights stayed behind me, always at the same distance, neither gaining nor falling back. After 20 miles of that, my nerves started to buzz. I slowed down a bit, flicked my hazards for a second, and pulled onto the shoulder to let them pass. But when I stopped, the lights stopped. My stomach went cold. I grabbed my flashlight, Glanced out the window, but the road behind me was empty. No headlights. No car. Just black highway stretching forever. I flipped my high beams on, leaned forward. Nothing. I got back onto the road, my heart hammering. Maybe I'd been seeing mirages. Fatigue and dark roads play tricks on you. But 5 minutes later, the lights were back. This time closer. Brighter. Too bright. They almost filled my mirrors, glaring into the cab. My hands tightened on the wheel. I sped up. They sped up. I slowed down. They slowed down. They were matching me exactly. And then I noticed something that made the hair on my arms stand up. The lights didn't cast shadows. Not on the road, not on my trailer, not anywhere. They were just there. I took the next exit off the highway, a cracked 2-lane road leading to a closed-down gas station I remembered from years ago. As soon as I turned, the lights vanished again. I sat there in front of the boarded-up building, engine idling, staring into the dark. I thought about turning around, like heading back to the main highway, but something made me hesitate. I glanced down at my phone. No signal. Figures. That's when I heard it. A faint knocking on the back of my trailer. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. My throat went dry. I killed the engine and listened. Nothing but the desert wind. Then it started again, faster this time. Knock, 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 knock. I grabbed my crowbar from behind the seat, swung open the cab door, and jumped down, boots crunching on gravel. The knocking stopped immediately. I crept around to the rear of the trailer, every instinct telling me to run. The padlock on the doors was intact. No sign of anyone. But when I shone my flashlight at the doors, my heart froze. Scratches. Deep, ragged grooves running down the metal, like something with claws had tried to tear its way in. They hadn't been there when I left Ely. I knew they hadn't. I backed away, scanning the lot. There was movement just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Shapes, maybe, shifting in the dark. Tall, thin shapes. I blinked, and they were gone. My breathing was so loud it drowned out the silence. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and turned the engine over. As soon as I put it in gear, I heard the knocking again, this time from the passenger side door. I stomped the gas and tore out of there, tires spitting gravel. Back on the main highway, I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't want to know what was behind me, but some instinct made me glance anyway. For a split second, I saw something clinging to the back of my trailer. A figure, impossibly long limbs spread wide, its face hidden but its hands clawed deep into the metal. It didn't look like a person, not even close. I drove until dawn without stopping, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. When the sun finally crept over the mountains, I pulled into a rest area. My trailer doors were still locked, but the scratches had gotten deeper. Fresh gouges, like the thing had been trying all night to pry its way inside. My stomach churned. I walked around the rig, scanning the asphalt. That's when I saw the prints, faint but clear in the dust. Long, narrow prints that started at the back of the trailer and disappeared into nothing. I didn't tell anyone about it. What was I supposed to say? Hey, something tried to climb my truck last night in the middle of the desert? People would think I'd lost it. Maybe I had. But over the next few days, the signs followed me. Deep scratches appearing on the trailer overnight. Footprints in mud at truck stops. My cameras going dead for entire stretches of highway. Every time I slept in the cab, I'd wake up to a sound outside. Scraping, breathing, the faintest tap against the window, like someone dragging a fingertip along the glass. 2 weeks later, near the Utah border, it escalated. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. My headlights picked up movement on the shoulder, a figure standing just off the road. Thin. Wrong. As I got closer, it turned its head in an unnatural jerking motion and stepped into the lane. I swerved hard, my trailer fishtailing, barely keeping control. In my side mirror, I saw its reflection. Its face was nothing but darkness, but its eyes glowed faintly and fixed on me. After that, I started driving only during daylight. Didn't matter. I'd see it in the corners of truck stops, crouched by dumpsters, or standing by the exit ramp when I pulled back onto the interstate. Always there, always watching. I stopped sleeping entirely. My hands shook constantly. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that black shape pressed against my trailer doors, fingers clawing, trying to get in. Then came the night in Oregon. A steep mountain road, no guardrail, nothing but trees on either side. My radio cut out, my dash lights flickered, and the engine died without warning. Dead quiet except for the ticking of the cooling engine. I sat there gripping the wheel, heart pounding, when I heard it. On the roof. Heavy. Moving slowly from the back of the trailer to the cab. My breath caught. The door handle jiggled, once, twice, then something pressed its face against the passenger side window. Not a face, exactly, more like a void, shaped like one. It stared at me for what felt like forever. I don't remember starting the engine. I just remember driving, speeding through hairpin turns, not caring if I crashed as long as I got away. When I finally stopped at a truck plaza hours later, the passenger side window was covered in handprints. Long, narrow, clawed handprints. I don't know what's following me. I don't know if it's real or if I've gone mad from the miles and the loneliness, but I know I'm not alone on these roads at night anymore. Something out there knows me. It wants in, and every mile I drive, it gets closer. Story the end. It was late summer, the kind of heavy, humid night that sticks to your skin even with the AC blasting. I'd been running long haul for over a decade by then, and though I'd had my fair share of unnerving nights on the road, nothing ever really scared me. I guess I'd gotten comfortable in the routine. Endless black highways, buzzing fluorescent rest stops, the occasional strange character you try to avoid eye contact with. But that night on US Route 50 in Nevada, what they call the loneliest road in America, it changed the way I looked at empty stretches of highway forever. My haul was simple enough. Auto parts from Kansas City bound for Sacramento. My dispatcher put me on that route to shave off time, and I agreed because I'd driven it before. Still, that road is the kind of place where you can go an hour without seeing another pair of headlights. Some drivers hate it because of how isolating it feels, but I always liked the quiet, or I used to. It was about 2 in the morning when the weirdness started. My headlights cut through the desert nothingness, illuminating little but scrub brush and rock. I'd been awake too long, sipping lukewarm coffee from a thermos, fighting off the exhaustion gnawing at me. I had the window cracked, letting the warm desert wind whip around the cab when I noticed something up ahead in my high beams. At first, I thought it was just an animal by the roadside. Happens often, deer, coyotes, sometimes cattle that get loose. But as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was standing right at the shoulder, facing the highway. Not walking, not trying to wave me down, just standing. He didn't move as my lights hit him. He was wearing old clothes, maybe jeans and a jacket. But what caught me was his face, or rather the lack of one. It was like my lights hit him dead on, but there was no detail, no features, just a pale blur where eyes and a mouth should be. I jolted in my seat, blinked hard, and when my rig roared past him, I checked the mirror. Nothing. No one was there. I tried to shake it off. I was tired, maybe starting to nod off, my brain playing tricks. But not even 5 miles later, there he was again. Same stance, same blurred face, standing on the shoulder, closer this time. I slammed the brakes, my trailer rattling as the rig slowed hard. I stared, and the man didn't move, just stood there like he was waiting. Then, as I blinked, he was gone, vanished into thin air. I sat there on the empty highway, heart hammering, sweat dripping down my temple. I told myself I couldn't stop, couldn't let exhaustion take me down, so I shifted back into gear and pushed on. For the next hour, the figure kept appearing, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes in my mirrors. Once I swore I saw him standing in the middle of the road, but when I blinked, there was nothing. Every time it was the same blur of a face, as though whoever or whatever it was didn't want me to recognize it. Finally, I spotted a pull-off, a small, beat-up rest area with 2 flickering lamps and a single picnic table. My nerves were shredded, and I figured a quick nap might help. I pulled in, shut down the engine, and sat there listening to the tick of the cooling motor. The desert night was quiet. Too quiet. No crickets, no wind, just silence pressing in from all sides. I tilted the seat back, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Just fatigue, nothing more. My eyelids grew heavy, and at some point I must have drifted off. A noise woke me. A faint, deliberate knock on the passenger door. Every muscle in me went rigid. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening. Another knock, louder this time. 3 slow raps like knuckles on the metal. I turned my head as quietly as I could and looked at the window. A face was pressed against the glass. Not a normal face. Too close, too pale, the skin stretched like wax. The features were blurred just like on the roadside, as if they weren't fully formed. But the eyes, God, the eyes, were dark pits, bottomless, boring into me through the glass. I scrambled for the ignition, fired up the engine, and floored it out of there back, my tires spitting gravel as I pulled back onto the highway. My chest was tight, my breathing ragged, but I didn't look back. For the next 100 miles, I kept expecting to see that faceless man again, waiting on the shoulder. But I didn't. Not once. By the time the sun finally crept up behind the mountains, I convinced myself I'd dreamed it, that exhaustion had finally gotten to me in a bad way. But when I stopped in Fallon later that morning to fuel up, I noticed something that still turns my stomach to think about. On the passenger side window, where I'd seen that face pressed up against the glass, there was a greasy smudged imprint, a perfect oval, about the size of a human face. I scrubbed at it until the glass was clean, but no amount of wiping could get rid of the chill in my bones. I haven't taken Route 50 again since that night. I don't care if it adds hours to my run. That road may be lonely, but I know now I wasn't alone out there. And whatever was following me, whatever was trying to get into my truck, I don't think it wanted a ride. Story the end. The night was cold and dry, the kind of Midwestern darkness that seems to stretch forever beyond the reach of your headlights. I had just fueled up at a tiny truck stop outside of Amarillo, Texas, a place I'd been to dozens of times over the years. It was almost 2 a.m., and I had an 8-hour drive ahead of me to deliver a load of dry goods to a distribution center in Oklahoma City. It should have been routine, but that night didn't feel routine at all. The first thing that got under my skin was how empty the road was. Usually you see a few rigs at that hour, a handful of cars, maybe a late-night sheriff's cruiser patrolling the highway, but the road felt abandoned. My CB radio, which usually buzzed with chatter from other drivers, was dead silent. It was just me, the road, and the low hum of my engine as I pushed my Freightliner east on Highway 287. A few miles out of town, I noticed a light in my mirror. Faint at first, then brighter. Headlights. Another rig. No big deal. But it wasn't acting like a normal truck. It kept its distance exactly, no matter how much I accelerated or slowed down. I tried switching lanes. It switched lanes, too. I flicked my hazard lights on and off, hoping whoever was back there would get the message and pass. Nothing. My nerves started to fray about 30 minutes into this. There's a type of paranoia that sets in when you're alone on a dark highway, especially when something doesn't make sense. I knew these roads like the back of my hand. This wasn't just some random driver heading the same way. Whoever was behind me was tracking me. I pulled into a rest area just past a closed way station. It was empty, lit by a single buzzing floodlight. I parked near the back, cut my engine, and watched my mirrors. Sure enough, the other truck rolled in too, slow and deliberate, but it didn't park. It just idled near the entrance. Its lights were dim, and I couldn't make out a cab company name or DOT numbers. It was matte black, no logos, no markings. I waited a few minutes, hoping it would leave. It didn't. I got out of my cab, the night air biting against my face, and tried to get a better look. The driver's side window was too dark to see through, and the truck was dead silent except for the idle rumble of its engine. No movement, no CB chatter. Nothing. Finally, I climbed back into my cab, locked the doors, and fired up my engine. The moment I put it in gear, the other truck's headlights brightened, and it slowly followed me out of the rest area, back onto the highway. For the next 2 hours, no matter what I did, taking random exits, slowing down to a crawl, accelerating to near my governor limit, that truck was there. Always the same distance behind me, like it was tethered to me. Somewhere near the Red River, the fog started rolling in. It wasn't normal fog. It came in fast, thick, like smoke from a fire. My headlights barely cut through it, and my GPS began glitching, showing my truck floating off the highway entirely. The CB came alive with static and faint whispers, like someone breathing too close to the microphone. I killed the radio, but the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to echo in my cab, faint, unintelligible, but urgent. My hands were trembling on the wheel, my heart hammering. I glanced in the mirror, nothing but a black wall of fog. The truck wasn't visible anymore, but I could feel it, the low rumble of its engine vibrating through the pavement. Then I saw something on the side of the road, a figure standing just past the guardrail. Tall, impossibly tall, its arms hanging at its sides like ropes. It was backlit by my headlights, but its face was obscured by the fog. As I passed, its head turned slowly to follow me, though its body didn't move. I pressed the pedal harder, trying to put distance between me and whatever that was. My trailer rattled over the uneven asphalt, and the whispers in my cab grew louder, overlapping like a crowd of voices all talking at once. Up ahead, the black truck materialized again out of the fog, this time stopped dead in the middle of the road. No lights, no movement. It was just there, blocking both lanes. My stomach dropped. I swerved onto the shoulder, gravel spraying, barely keeping control of my rig. As I passed, I caught a glimpse of the cab. The driver's door was open, but no one was inside. The seats were empty. And yet, as I looked in my mirror, the truck behind me roared back to life, headlights blazing, bearing down on me with impossible speed. I floored it. The road twisted through a patch of woods, and my trailer swayed dangerously, but I didn't dare slow down. My mirrors were filled with blinding light now, like the truck was only inches from my rear bumper. The whispers in my cab turned into screams, high, keening wails that made my ears ring. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The fog thinned. The lights behind me vanished. My GPS snapped back to normal. My CB was dead quiet. When I finally pulled into the delivery yard in Oklahoma City at dawn, I sat in my cab for nearly an hour before I could bring myself to get out. The dispatcher said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told him I almost hit a deer to explain why I was so shaken, but the truth was, I couldn't explain what happened. A few days later, at a truck stop in Arkansas, I overheard two drivers swapping stories about a black rig that follows you on empty highways at night. One said he'd seen it outside of Dallas. Another swore it tried to run him off the road in New Mexico. Both described the same thing. No markings, no driver, no plates. Since that night, I've changed how I drive. I won't take night runs anymore if I can help it. I stick to crowded interstates, avoid isolated stretches, and never, ever pull over if a truck without markings starts following me. But sometimes when I'm driving through the early hours of the morning before the sun comes up and the road ahead is empty, I'll see it again. A faint pair of headlights in my mirror, perfectly matching my speed, never passing, never falling behind. And even though I tell myself it's just another driver, a normal truck like any other, a part of me knows better. Some things out here don't belong to the living. Some trucks aren't driven by anyone you'd want to meet. And some nights, when the fog rolls in and the roads go silent, you can hear them coming, whispering, waiting, following. Story the end. The highway stretched out like an endless ribbon of black, broken only by the reflection of Joe Ramirez's headlights bouncing off faded lane markers. He'd been driving rigs for almost 15 years, coast to coast, through storms, ice, desert heat, and everything in between. He thought he had seen it all, until the night he picked up a run through western Kansas, a stretch of road drivers whispered about in hushed tones. Some called it Dead Man's Stretch. Others just said, "Don't stop there at night." Joe, tired but needing the money, shrugged it off. He didn't believe in ghost stories, at least not back then. The run was simple, freight from Denver to St. Louis. He'd left late in the afternoon, thinking he'd be well past Kansas by dawn. The radio kept him company for the first few hours, static and country ballads fading in and out as the miles passed. The loneliness of the job had always been part of the deal. Some nights, he didn't mind it. But there was something different about this run. The road felt heavier, quieter, like the world had gone still. Not another rig for miles, no headlights behind him, no stars above, just thick clouds covering the sky and his own beams cutting through the dark. He stopped at a diner outside Hayes around 10 p.m., grabbed some coffee, and fueled up. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a smoker's cough, looked at his rig and then back at him. "You headed east tonight?" she asked, voice low. "Yeah," Joe said, nodding. "Why?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the dark windows. "Best stay on the main roads. Don't pull off. Not for anything. Not around here." Joe smirked. Truckers always had stories like that. Still, her words lingered as he paid his bill and got back behind the wheel. By midnight, the sky had turned pitch black, the moon swallowed by clouds. The highway narrowed to 2 lanes, surrounded on both sides by endless fields. It was the kind of stretch that made you feel small, like the world had been reduced to just you and the hum of the engine. Joe felt his eyelids growing heavy, the caffeine wearing off. He slapped his face, rolled down the window for cold air. That's when he saw it. the faint outline of someone standing on the shoulder ahead. A hitchhiker, maybe. He slowed, not planning to pick him up, but curious who'd be out here in the middle of nowhere. The figure came into view, illuminated by the headlights. A tall man in a dirty gray coat, head bowed, one hand hanging limply at his side. Joe eased the rig closer, and that's when the man's head snapped up. His eyes caught the light, glowing with a pale, unnatural reflection. Joe's stomach turned cold. He hit the accelerator, flying past without looking back. But as he checked his side mirror a second later, the figure was gone. Not walking down the road, not fading into the distance. Just gone. He tried to tell himself it was fatigue, a trick of the light. But the fear gnawed at him. For the next 30 miles, every shadow looked like it was moving. Every flicker in the mirrors felt like someone was keeping pace with him. Then the CB crackled to life. Static at first, then a voice, low and distorted. "You shouldn't be out here, driver." Joe froze. He grabbed the mic. "Who's this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. No answer. Just static. Then the voice again, closer this time. "We see you." Joe dropped the mic, heart racing. He reached for his phone, but there was no signal, just the dead glow of the screen mocking him. Around 2 a.m., his fuel gauge dipped lower than he liked. Reluctantly, he pulled into a rest stop near an old grain silo, the only light a flickering street lamp buzzing overhead. The place was deserted. No other rigs, no cars, just silence. He filled the tank, trying to calm himself, telling himself it was just another night. Then he heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the truck. He spun around, tire iron in hand, but saw nothing. The sounds stopped. His breath clouded in front of him, even though the night wasn't that cold. Then, on the side of the trailer, 3 long scratches appeared, metal groaning as if clawed by something heavy. Joe dropped the iron, scrambled back into the cab, and locked the doors. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. Shadows moving along the road. Figures standing just beyond the headlights. Once, glancing in the side mirror, he saw someone sitting in his passenger seat, pale face grinning, eyes black as coal. He swerved, slammed the brakes, but when he looked again, the seat was empty. He barely made it to Kansas City by dawn, hands trembling, sweat soaked despite the chill. He parked the rig in the yard, climbed out, and found the scratches still carved into the trailer. Deep, raw grooves that no one could explain. His dispatcher laughed it off, told him he probably scraped against a fence or a tree. But Joe knew better. He hadn't left the highway. Weeks passed, but he never shook the feeling. The nightmares followed him off the road. He'd wake at night to knocking on his apartment door, only to open it and find no one there. Sometimes the CB would crackle in his parked truck, that same distorted voice whispering, "We see you." Joe started drinking more, sleeping less, taking only daytime runs. He thought maybe he'd escaped it. Until one night, a last-minute run forced him back through Kansas, along the same lonely stretch. He almost made it through without incident. Almost. Around 3 a.m., just outside Salina, his headlights caught something in the distance. Not a figure this time, but a whole line of people, standing across the road, shoulder to shoulder. Dozens of them, all facing him, all with the same empty eyes. He slammed the brakes, the rig screeching to a halt. When the truck stopped, the road was empty again, just asphalt stretching into the dark. His hands shook on the wheel. He couldn't do it anymore. The road had taken something from him, something he couldn't get back. Joe quit trucking 2 months later. Sold his rig, moved back in with his sister in Missouri. He never told her the real reason. He just said he was tired of the miles, tired of the loneliness. But on sleepless nights, when the wind howls outside and the house creaks in the dark, he swears he can still hear that voice in the static. "We see you." And he knows deep down that one day, when he least expects it, they'll be waiting for him again. Story the end. The road through New Mexico at night has a way of turning on you. In the daylight, it feels empty, endless, the desert stretching out in every direction under a wide sky. But at night, when the moon is hidden and your headlights are the only light for miles, the emptiness changes. It becomes heavy, pressing, like the desert itself is leaning against your cab. I'd been hauling for close to 16 years, long enough to know how to pace myself. But this load was different. High-value electronics bound for Los Angeles, the kind that dispatch kept calling me about every few hours to make sure I was on schedule. The pay was good. enough that I agreed to a tighter deadline than I should have. That's how I found myself barreling down I-40 past midnight, tired enough that the white lines blurred but wired enough from truck stop coffee to keep my hands clenched around the wheel. The CB had been quiet for hours. Usually, even at night, there's chatter, warnings about cops, jokes, the usual road talk. But the band was dead silent. I switched to local stations, but all I got was static or faint whispers of Spanish stations fading in and out. It left me with nothing but the hum of the tires and the occasional whistle of wind sneaking through the cab. That was when I saw the first truck. Up ahead, maybe half a mile, there was a rig pulled over on the shoulder. No hazard lights, no reflective triangles, just dark. As I passed, I glanced over, expecting to see a driver outside checking his tires or sleeping in the cab. But the cab door was hanging wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. The trailer doors were open too, yawning wide, empty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I thought about pulling over, but something in me said no. A setup, maybe. Hijackers use tricks like that, abandoned trucks, fake breakdowns, to lure drivers into stopping. So I kept going, telling myself it was safer that way. 30 minutes later, I saw another one. Different color, different company, but the same thing. The rig parked dark, cab door hanging open, trailer empty. My stomach dropped. Something wasn't right. I grabbed the mic and keyed up, my voice rough in the silence. Breaker 19, anyone got eyes on mile marker 326? I'm seeing abandoned units out here. Static. No reply. I let it go and kept rolling, but my grip on the wheel tightened. I was fighting the urge to look in the mirrors. I don't know why, but I felt like if I looked too long, I'd see something following me. I passed the third one an hour later. By then, I wasn't even surprised. Same story. Cab open, trailer open, nobody around. Only this time, as my headlights swept across it, I saw movement inside the cab. A figure, hunched, head low, sitting in the driver's seat. Pale face turned straight toward me. I nearly swerved into the median. By the time I steadied myself and looked back, the truck was gone. Not just the figure. Gone. No taillights, no shadow, nothing. Like it had never been there. I told myself I was hallucinating from exhaustion. I promised I'd pull over at the next truck stop, no matter how small. When I saw the neon glow of one up ahead, relief flooded me. But when I pulled in, I realized it wasn't relief at all. The lot was full of trucks, all parked haphazard, doors open, trailers gaping, no lights in the windows, no drivers moving between them. The diner was dark, the gas pumps frozen, and the silence. Absolute silence. I sat there idling at the edge of the lot, staring at the scene. It looked like every driver had just climbed out at once and vanished. My headlights swept over the trailers, over the open cabs, and that was when I saw them. People. Dozens of them. Standing between the trucks, motionless. Thin, pale, faces too smooth, they are too blank. Their eyes reflected the light in a way that made my gut turn. They weren't looking at me directly, they were just waiting. I didn't think. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it, tires spitting gravel as I shot back onto the highway. In my mirror, I saw them move for the first time. Every head turned at once, following me as I left. I drove until dawn, shaking, barely aware of the road. When the sun came up, the world looked normal again. Trucks passed me, again. Rest stops were busy. Chatter returned to the CB. It was like nothing had happened. But that night, parked at a legitimate truck stop outside Flagstaff, I woke to a sound I'll never forget. Knuckles. Tapping on the cab door. Slow, deliberate. I froze. Every muscle locked. I didn't want to look, but my eyes betrayed me. I turned my head toward the passenger window. A face was pressed against the glass. White, featureless, smooth as wax except for the eyes, reflecting the dim glow of the lot's floodlights. Too big, too black. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. It just tapped again. I scrambled for the keys, but they weren't in the ignition. My heart jumped into my throat as I searched frantically, hands shaking. They weren't on the dash, not in the cup holder, not on the seat. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was inside now. I don't remember how I got the engine started, but I did. The headlights blazed on, and the face was gone. I pulled out so fast I nearly clipped another parked rig. When I finally stopped 2 states later, the keys were right there in the ignition, like they'd never been missing. I still drive, because what else can I do? But I don't pull into small stops anymore. I don't look too closely at rigs on the side of the road. And every night before I shut my eyes in the sleeper, I hear it in my head. That slow, steady tapping. waiting for me to open the door. Story the end. The night was already deep when I crossed into Missouri, my 18-wheeler carrying a load of steel beams bound for Tennessee. I'd been on the road since dawn, my eyes stinging from the long drive, my back stiff from sitting so long. Trucking wears you down in ways most people don't understand. Long hours alone, endless stretches of road that blur together, and the kind of silence that plays tricks on your mind when the CB chatter dies and the radio fades to static. But that night, I wasn't just worn down. I was rattled in a way that I still don't like to put into words. It started somewhere outside of Rolla, maybe 11:30 p.m. The highway was nearly empty, just me and the occasional pair of headlights in the opposite lane. I kept seeing flashes in my mirrors, like someone was tailing me with their brights on. But every time I slowed down, nothing was there, just my trailer glowing in the reflection of my own lights. I chalked it up to fatigue. I had another hour in me before I'd pull into a rest area. I cracked the window to let the cold air slap me awake, and for a while it worked. Then, somewhere past an old service road, I saw a vehicle on the shoulder, an old sedan, beat up, hood popped open, hazard lights blinking weakly. Normally I don't stop. Too many stories of setups and robberies, but something about this car felt wrong. There was no driver, no one standing near it. Just the car, rocking slightly like someone had gotten out moments before. As I passed, I glanced in my mirror. That's when my blood went cold. Someone was standing behind the car, a man, tall and thin, almost skeletal, his face pale in the hazard light. He wasn't waving for help, wasn't signaling me, just standing there, head tilted, staring directly at my truck as I rolled by. I gripped the wheel tighter and told myself to keep moving. People break down on highways all the time. Nothing strange about that, but I couldn't shake the image of his face, blank and almost too still, like he wasn't really alive. 15 minutes later, I was still thinking about him when something banged against my trailer. A heavy thud, like a fist slamming into the steel. I jolted in my seat, checked the mirrors, but there was nothing. My first thought was maybe I'd hit a branch or some debris on the road, but then it came again. Bang, bang, like someone pounding from the inside of the trailer. I pulled over, heart racing, threw on my flashers, and climbed out. The night air was freezing, biting through my jacket. I walked along the length of the trailer, flashlight sweeping across the steel walls. No dents, no scratches, nothing unusual. The road was empty. No other cars, no sound except the low rumble of my idling engine. I climbed back in the cab, locking the doors. Maybe it was just shifting cargo, I told myself, but the steel beams were chained tight. They couldn't move like that. I kept driving slower this time, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. It wasn't mine. It wasn't coming through the radio or the CB. It was behind me, in the sleeper. Low, heavy breathing, like someone trying to stay quiet. My hands shook on the wheel. I turned the radio up full blast, trying to drown it out, but beneath the music I could still hear it, steady and deliberate. I drove like that for another half hour, trying not to look in the mirrors, trying not to turn around. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to stop, to check. But I knew that if I looked, I'd see something I didn't want to see. Finally, I pulled into a rest stop just outside St. James. It was nearly empty, just two other trucks parked at the far end, their cabs dark. I pulled into a space under the yellow lights, shut off the engine, and sat there. My chest tight, sweat dripping down my back despite the cold. The breathing had stopped. The cab was silent again. I sat there listening, waiting for what felt like forever. Then I worked up the courage to check the sleeper. I pulled the curtain back slowly, flashlight in hand. Empty. Just my bedding, my duffel bag, nothing else. I laughed, shaky, nervous, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Just exhaustion, I told myself. Just a mind trick after too many hours awake. I laid down, hoping to catch some sleep, but sleep never came. Around 3 a.m., I woke from a half-doze to the sound of footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, crunching steps, circling the truck. I held my breath, listening as they moved from one side to the other, pausing near the driver's door, then continuing around the trailer. I peeked through the curtain, but the lot was empty. No one out there. Then, clear as day, someone whispered through the thin metal wall of the cab. "You shouldn't have stopped." I froze, and my mouth went dry. I didn't move a muscle. Minutes passed. 10, 20, I don't know how long, but I didn't hear the footsteps again. Finally, when dawn broke, I started the engine and left that rest stop without looking back. I made my delivery that afternoon and didn't tell a soul what happened. Not until a week later, when I ran into another driver at a diner near Springfield. He was older, looked like he'd been hauling freight longer than I'd been alive. We got to talking about roads we avoided, and when I mentioned Rolla, he gave me a look I won't forget. "You seen him," he said quietly. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "The thin man. Shows up by the old cars on the shoulder. Stares at you. Sometimes climbs aboard if you're unlucky. They say he died out here years ago, waiting for help that never came. Now he's always waiting, always watching." I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't smile. He just sipped his coffee, eyes tired, like he'd seen him too. I don't take that route at night anymore. I stick to daylight hours when I'm anywhere near Rolla. But sometimes, when the radio cuts out and the mirrors flash with phantom lights, I swear I can still hear it. That steady, heavy breathing behind me, waiting for me to look. Story the end. It was late in November, cold enough that frost clung to the edges of the asphalt, when Martin Grady took a run hauling furniture from Omaha down to Dallas. He had been trucking for close to 15 years, a quiet man who preferred to keep to himself, rarely talking much at the truck stops, and often spending the nights driving straight through. The loneliness of the road never bothered him. In fact, he found comfort in the white lines flickering beneath his headlights and the endless hum of the engine. But there are some nights where the road changes, where something hidden seems to stretch out of the darkness and press itself against you. That was the night Martin had. The run started simple enough. A few hours south of Lincoln, traffic had thinned until he was one of the few rigs still moving. His CB was silent, except for the occasional burst of static, and his AM radio barely picked up anything beyond faint gospel music. The air was sharp, stars spread across the sky, his breath fogging up the cab whenever he cracked the window. He felt good, awake, alert. But around midnight, things began to unravel. The first odd thing he noticed was a car on the shoulder. At first glance, it was nothing, an old station wagon, hood up, hazard lights blinking dimly. But as he passed, he looked for the driver. There was none. No one standing by the hood, no one sitting inside. Just a running car, door slightly ajar, blinking steadily. Martin frowned, gripping the wheel tighter, eyes flicking back into the mirror until the car vanished behind him. He thought about pulling over, but something about it felt wrong. Truckers had long told stories about bait cars left on highways, traps for those dumb enough to stop. He drove on. But 20 minutes later, when he curved around a long bend, there it was again, the same station wagon, hazards blinking weakly. This time it sat on the opposite shoulder, nose pointed into the dark. The hood was still up, door still cracked open. Martin's chest tightened. "Nope," he muttered under his breath, pressing harder on the gas. He kept driving, knuckles white on the steering wheel. An hour later, just past the small town of Belleville, he saw it again. Same car, same details. But this time, the hazard lights weren't blinking. The interior dome light was on, and in the driver's seat sat a figure, head bowed forward, motionless. Martin's throat went dry. He couldn't stop staring as his truck barreled past. The figure didn't move, didn't lift its head, didn't wave for help. It just sat there, perfectly still, illuminated by that sickly yellow dome light. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if fatigue was making him see things, but deep down he knew he wasn't imagining it. Something was wrong with that car. The CB crackled to life then. A voice, low and static-filled, came through. "Driver, don't stop. Keep moving." Martin blinked, heart pounding, and grabbed the mic. "Who's this?" he asked, voice unsteady. The line went dead. Nothing but static again. He drove on, every instinct telling him to avoid the shoulders, to keep moving, no matter what he saw. And he did see things. A few miles past the Oklahoma border, he spotted figures at the tree line. Tall, shadowy shapes standing still among the frost-covered brush. One raised its arm slowly as he passed, as though pointing at him. Martin swore under his breath and turned the radio up louder, but the music warped, voices bleeding through, faint whispers beneath the notes. He killed the radio. The road seemed endless, like it was pulling him farther from reality with every mile. Towns he passed through looked abandoned, storefronts dark, gas stations shuttered. His GPS froze on a blank map, the screen glowing but unhelpful. Martin's head buzzed with unease, but the real fear hit when the station wagon appeared a fourth time. This time, it sat directly in his lane. He slammed the brakes, the trailer lurching as tires screamed against asphalt. The truck swerved, stopping just feet from the car. The hood was still up, door cracked open, interior light on. The figure was back in the driver's seat, head bowed, motionless. Martin stared through his windshield, chest heaving. Then, slowly, the figure lifted its head. Its face was pale, slack, like wax pulled tight over bone, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. Its mouth opened in a wide, silent scream, stretching far too long, far too unnaturally. Martin jolted in his seat, fumbling to throw the rig into reverse, backing away from the car until he could maneuver around it. As he pulled past, he refused to look again, but in his peripheral vision he swore he saw more figures sitting in the back seat, their heads turning in unison as his truck roared by. By the time dawn broke, Martin was a wreck. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling, his nerves shredded. He pulled into a crowded truck stop outside Denton, desperate for the noise of other people, for the sight of sunlight burning away the horrors of the night. He sat in the diner, sipping bitter coffee, trying to explain what he'd seen to another driver he knew. The man just frowned, shook his head, and said, "You've been on the road too long, Marty. I've heard others talk about that wagon, but it's just stories. Don't let it get to you." But Martin couldn't shake it. Even now, years later, he swears some nights when the roads are empty and the air is cold, he sees hazard lights blinking faintly in the distance. He doesn't stop. He never will again. Because he knows what waits inside that car isn't alive, and it isn't human. It's something the road keeps out there for those who drive too long, too late, and too far. And the whispers on his CB when the static grows sharp always say the same thing. Don't stop. Keep moving. Story the end. I started driving trucks long before GPS units were standard, before cell phones could bail you out when you were lost, before every truck stop had surveillance cameras on every corner. I've seen plenty on the road, more than enough to keep me from sleeping straight through most nights. But there's one trip in particular that never leaves me. Even now, decades later, when I wake up sweating in the cab of whatever rig I'm running, my heart beating like I just ran a marathon, it always comes back to that one stretch of road in Oklahoma during the fall of 1998. I'd picked up a load out of Fort Worth bound for Kansas City. It was supposed to be an easy run, not too long, not too much trouble. The dispatcher set me up with a refrigerated trailer full of beef, and it was my job to keep it cold and moving. I'd been through Oklahoma plenty of times before, but the thing about long-haul trucking is that no matter how many times you pass a stretch of road, the conditions change. Sometimes it's weather, sometimes it's traffic, sometimes it's people, and sometimes it's things you can't really explain. That night started out normal enough. I fueled up at a Love's outside of Gainesville and grabbed a couple of prepackaged sandwiches and coffee that tasted like burnt water. I got back on the road around sundown, my headlights stretching out ahead of me on the empty highway. The air was still and heavy, that kind of weight you feel in the atmosphere before a storm, but without any actual rain or lightning. I kept the radio low, just static and occasional chatter from other truckers, most of them far enough away that their voices cut in and out. Around midnight, I was deep into Oklahoma, somewhere between Ardmore and Ada, running a 2-lane stretch where the highway turns pitch black outside of the reach of your headlights. That part of the state has long, flat stretches broken by occasional tree lines, and at night you can't see much past what your high beams catch. It was lonely driving, the kind that makes your brain start playing tricks on you. You see movement in the shadows that isn't there. You hear creaks from the trailer that sound like whispers. I tried shaking it off, focusing on the road, on the dotted white lines sliding under me one after another. It was about 1 a.m. when I first noticed something strange. Up ahead, I saw taillights. Not unusual, of course. Plenty of trucks run those roads at night. But these lights were odd. They looked too close together, like the vehicle was narrower than a truck, but not quite like a car. They had this faint reddish glow that wasn't bright enough to be normal brake lights. At first, I thought maybe it was some old farm truck or a jalopy with faulty wiring, something barely road legal. I slowed a bit, keeping my distance, because the last thing I needed was to rear end some half broken down pickup. I followed those lights for a good 5 minutes, trying to gauge the vehicle. I never seemed to gain on it, though I should have been. My Kenworth had no trouble keeping steady speed, but the distance never closed. I leaned forward, squinting, trying to make out the shape. That's when I realized something that set my stomach on edge. The lights weren't reflecting on the road. Usually, taillights throw some kind of glow on the asphalt, even faintly, but these just hung there. 2 dim red dots floating in the blackness. I grabbed the CB, clicked it on, and called out. Westbound on 37, anybody else got eyes on those lights up ahead? Static. No one answered. I tried again, this time more direct. Vehicle running northbound, 2-lane outside Ada, anybody out there? Again, nothing. Just static and the faint hiss of empty airwaves. The longer I followed those lights, the more uneasy I felt. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I could feel sweat prickling at the back of my neck, even though the cab was cool from the AC. I eased off the accelerator just a bit, figuring maybe I'd let the thing pull ahead and out of sight. But when I slowed down, the lights seemed to slow too. Not braking, not dimming, just adjusting, staying the same distance ahead of me no matter what I did. I must have stared at those lights for 20 minutes, hypnotized, unsettled. Then, without warning, they vanished. Not faded, not turned, not crested over a hill. 1 second they were there, the next second the darkness swallowed them whole. My stomach dropped, and every instinct in me screamed that something wasn't right. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the vehicle turned off suddenly onto an unmarked road. Maybe a hill dipped low enough to hide them. But I knew damn well this stretch didn't have any sharp turns or dips for miles. The road ahead was empty again, nothing but darkness. I told myself to shake it off, that I was tired, my mind was playing tricks. But that didn't explain why my hands were trembling, or why I felt like someone was watching me from inside the cab. About 15 minutes later, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the shoulder up ahead was a figure. At first, I thought it was just some stranded motorist, but as my lights swept over him, my gut told me this wasn't right. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes that seemed out of place for the highway. No reflective gear, no flashlight, nothing. He wasn't waving me down, wasn't even holding out his thumb for a ride. He just stood there, inches from the white line, facing the road with his head slightly tilted like he was listening to something only he could hear. I passed him, heart pounding, trying not to look directly, but catching a glimpse anyway. His skin looked pale, almost gray in the headlights. His eyes, though, I'll never forget his eyes. They didn't follow me like you'd expect. They stared straight ahead, unblinking, empty, like glass. The CB crackled suddenly, loud in the silence, making me jump. A voice came through, low and distorted. "Don't stop." That was it. Just those 2 words, then static again. I nearly dropped the mic, my hands shaking so bad. I hadn't touched the CB since my earlier callouts, and no one had answered then. I tried calling back, asking who it was, but all I got was silence. For the next 30 miles, I felt like that figure was still there, standing just behind me on the shoulder, watching. My mirrors showed nothing but darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Every bump of the road, every rattle in the trailer made me twitch. Somewhere outside McAlester, I finally saw signs for a truck stop. My nerves were shot, and I figured I needed to pull off, grab another coffee, maybe just breathe for a minute. I eased into the lot, parked among a handful of other rigs, and killed the engine. The moment the hum of the diesel stopped, the silence pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I climbed down, my boots crunching gravel, and headed toward the building. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing, casting everything in a sickly pale glow. The lot was quiet, too quiet for a place usually full of engines idling, drivers moving about. I noticed only 3 other trucks, all parked with curtains drawn, no movement inside. Inside the truck stop, the air smelled stale, like old grease and disinfectant. A lone cashier sat behind the counter, a heavy-set woman flipping through a magazine. She barely looked up when I walked in. The place was empty, no drivers sipping coffee, no one browsing the aisles, just me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. "Quiet night," I said, trying to make small talk. The cashier looked up at me, her eyes tired but sharp. You're on 287, aren't you? The question caught me off guard. Yeah. Why? She closed her magazine slowly. Lot of stories about that stretch. Drivers see things, hear things. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Like what? She shook her head. Different things. Lights that don't belong. People on the side of the road. Voices on the radio. Most don't talk about it. The ones who do don't usually come back this way. Her words sank into me like ice water. I didn't press further. I just paid for my coffee, went back to my truck, and locked the doors. I thought maybe I'd feel safer in the cab, but the silence outside was worse than the road. The kind that makes you feel like if you breathe too loud, something might hear you. I kept the sleeper curtains wide open, my eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds, waiting to see that pale figure standing under the sodium lights. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have drifted off sometime after 3. My dreams were jagged, broken. I heard the voice from the CB over and over. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. When I woke, the sky was gray with dawn. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined everything, that the night had just gotten into my head. But when I checked my mirrors, I saw something that froze me to my seat. On the side of my trailer, streaked down the white paint, were handprints. Long, thin, smeared like someone had dragged their fingers down the length of the metal. I climbed out, walked the length of the trailer, and counted at least 20 of them. They weren't greasy like a mechanic's hands, and they weren't dirty like road grime. They were faint, almost dust-like, but unmistakably there. I didn't stick around to question it. I got back in the cab, fired up the engine, and drove straight to Kansas City without stopping again except for fuel. To this day, I don't know what I saw on that road. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe some sick prank, maybe something else entirely. But I'll tell you this. I've been on the road for 30 years, and I've never felt fear like that night. And every time I drive through Oklahoma, I avoid that stretch, no matter how far out of the way it takes me, because some loads aren't worth what you might pick up along the way. Story, the end. The night I'm about to tell you about still replays in my head in pieces, like looking at a shattered mirror where every shard shows something you don't want to see. I've been driving trucks for more than 20 years, hauling freight across the country, and I've seen some strange things in the dark stretches of highway. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has stuck with me like what I went through on a haul through northern Nevada 5 years back. I used to think most trucker horror stories were just exaggerated campfire tales for rookies, the kind of thing told over bad coffee in a roadside diner to spook the new guys. After that night, I don't laugh at those stories anymore. It was late October, cold enough at night that frost clung to the mirrors by dawn. I had a run from Salt Lake City out to Sacramento, mostly boxed consumer goods, nothing unusual. I'd been given a deadline that pushed me into driving longer hours than I should have, but that's how this job goes sometimes. You push through fatigue because the bills don't care how tired you are. I'd taken I-80 west and passed Reno just before 11 p.m. My plan was to get as far as I could before pulling into a rest area to sleep a few hours. That stretch past Reno heading toward Truckee is long, quiet, and darker than most highways you'll ever drive. The mountains rise around you, the forest swallowing up the horizon, and the traffic thins until it feels like you're the only one left awake in the world. It was one of those nights where the radio crackled more static than music, so I shut it off and just listened to the hum of the tires on the pavement. About 30 minutes past Reno, I noticed headlights in my mirrors. That wasn't strange in itself, but what was strange was how they lingered. Whoever it was, they didn't try to pass, didn't fall back, just held steady about 20 feet behind me. At first, I figured it was another trucker pacing me, but the lights looked lower, like a car. Sometimes drivers hang back in a truck's slipstream to save fuel, though it's dangerous as hell. I slowed a little, expecting the car to pass. It didn't. I sped up to see if I could lose them. They sped up too. This went on for almost 20 minutes. The presence of those headlights began to gnaw at me. It felt like someone breathing down my neck, silent and insistent. Finally, I hit a stretch with an emergency pull-off and decided to get over, figuring they'd just pass. I flicked my blinker, eased onto the shoulder, and watched. The car slowed, crawled behind me, then stopped on the shoulder about 30 feet back. Their headlights flooded my mirrors, blinding me. I sat there with my hand hovering over the CB mic, Dave, but I didn't press it. Something about this didn't feel like a situation words would solve. I thought maybe it was a drunk or some idiot messing around. I cut my lights for a moment to signal them to go on. They didn't move. I sat there, engine idling, sweat starting to bead under my cap. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably 2 minutes, I put the rig in gear and pulled back onto the road. The car followed. For the next 40 miles, through winding mountain roads and pitch-black stretches with no lights but my own, that car stuck with me like a shadow. My pulse was thudding in my ears. I started to wonder if I'd somehow gotten tangled up with someone dangerous, gang stuff, road rage, or something worse. Out here, with no cops in sight and no cell reception in most patches, you're on your own. Finally, I reached a rest area near Donner Summit. My nerves were shot, and I knew I couldn't keep driving with this car dogging me. I swung in, hoping it would spook them off if there were other trucks around. The lot was nearly empty, just one other rig parked way in the back and a single sedan with no one inside. I parked near the entrance under a light. For once, I was grateful for those harsh yellow bulbs buzzing overhead. The car that had been following me pulled in too. My stomach dropped. It didn't park near me, though. Instead, it rolled slowly past, circled the lot once, then stopped across the lot facing me. The headlights went off, leaving only the silhouette of the car under the dim lot lights. I couldn't make out who was inside. I told myself I wasn't going to get out. Whatever they wanted, I wasn't about to make it easier for them. I killed my engine, locked the doors, and sat there with my heart hammering. For a long time, nothing happened. I stared across the lot, trying to keep my breathing steady. At some point, exhaustion started to win, and my eyelids drooped. I jerked awake when I heard something outside. A soft scrape like footsteps on gravel. I froze. The sound came from the passenger side of my truck. Slowly, I reached over and flipped on the cab light. The window was fogging from my breath, but I could just make out movement below. Someone standing close to the truck. I grabbed my flashlight and snapped it on, shining it out the window. Nothing, just the lot stretching out empty. My pulse was a drumbeat in my throat. I killed the light and sat perfectly still, ears straining. Another sound, this time from behind the cab near the trailer, a faint metallic ting like a hand brushing the side. I wanted to believe it was the wind, but the air was dead still. I unlocked the driver's side door, just enough to slip out quietly, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. I circled around, scanning the shadows. My breath steamed in the cold air, and the gravel crunched too loud under my boots. I checked the trailer, the wheels, the back. No one. But when I came back around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the passenger side door, just below the handle, smeared in what looked like dirt or maybe grease, was the shape of a handprint. Large, fingers spread wide, streaking downward as though someone had dragged their hand across it. I bolted back into the cab, slammed the locks down, and started the engine. My headlights swept across the lot as I turned, and in that split second, I saw the car across the lot again. Only this time, the driver's side door was open. I floored it out of there, tires spitting gravel. I didn't look back. I drove for hours, pushing through exhaustion until I hit the outskirts of Sacramento at dawn. When I finally pulled into the delivery yard, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely sign the paperwork. For the rest of that week, I told myself it was just some creep messing with me, maybe more than one person. But the thing that keeps me awake isn't the chase, or even the handprint. It's what I saw later that same day, when I finally got a chance to check over the rig in daylight. Near the rear trailer doors, etched faintly into the grime and dust, were words written by a fingertip. 4 words that made my stomach twist into knots. Let us in now. I never saw that car again, never figured out who was in it or what they wanted. Some nights when I'm parked at a lonely rest area, I still think about it. I picture those headlights in my mirror, steady, unblinking, mile after mile. And I wonder how close I came to disappearing out there, just another name whispered in a truck stop over bad coffee. Story the end. The sun had long disappeared behind the horizon when I hit the road out of Texas, hauling a flatbed loaded with construction equipment bound for Arizona. I'd been driving since the afternoon, my eyes gritty from fatigue, but the schedule didn't allow for rest. By the time I reached the stretch of I-10 that cuts through the West Texas desert, the sky was a pitch black void, the kind of night that makes you feel swallowed by the world. The only light came from my rig's headlights and the occasional reflection of a road sign. I was halfway through a long, empty stretch when I noticed the first thing that set my gut on edge: tire tracks in the dirt along the shoulder that weren't mine. At first, I thought maybe a car or another truck had passed, but these tracks were strange, too deep, too wide, and they appeared abruptly, as if some enormous vehicle had just appeared from nowhere. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining it, but the unease settled in anyway. Hours passed. My music, a mix of classic rock and talk radio, failed to distract me from the oppressive darkness. That's when I saw the lights in the distance. Two faint headlights that didn't behave like any normal vehicle. They hovered above the road, moving side to side as if scanning, but never getting closer. I flicked on my high beams, but the lights vanished as soon as I tried to focus on them. I reached for the CB radio, hoping to contact another driver, but there was nothing. No static, no voices, nothing. Just silence. The silence itself felt heavy, like the air had weight. I pressed on, but the feeling of being watched intensified. In the mirrors, I kept seeing shadows, fleeting glimpses of figures that seemed to vanish when I looked directly. At first, I told myself it was my imagination, fatigue messing with my senses. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. Around 2:30 a.m., I noticed a road sign for a rest area, though I was certain there hadn't been one for miles. The lights were flickering, and as I slowed to read it, the words seemed wrong. They shifted when I looked away, letters twisting into shapes that made no sense. The sign said, "Stop here or else," though the font and spacing were wrong, like it had been hastily scrawled by someone who didn't understand English. I shook my head and pressed on, gripping the wheel tighter. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought he was a man hitchhiking, standing at the edge of the lane with his thumb extended. But he was off. His arms were too long, hands dangling past his knees. His skin was pale, sickly, and wet, as if he had been standing in the rain for hours. His head tilted unnaturally, almost 90 degrees to one side, and when he looked at me, his eyes were black holes, empty voids that seemed to suck in the faint light from my headlights. I swerved, trying to avoid him, but he didn't move out of the way. I hit the horn, slammed on the brakes, and he just stood there, unblinking, staring. I floored it, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt, and prayed I could put distance between us. That's when I noticed movement in the mirrors. At first, I thought it was another vehicle, but there was nothing behind me, just darkness. And yet, something was moving there, something that matched my every maneuver, appearing in one mirror, then the other, always at the edge of vision. The rain became heavier, hammering the cab, drowning out any sound except the engine and my own ragged breathing. I felt a presence in the passenger seat. I refused to turn, refused to acknowledge it, but I could feel its weight, its gaze pressing into my shoulder. Then the whispers started. Low, wet, gurgling voices, speaking words I couldn't understand at first, until one became clear. My name. Over and over, drawn out, like it was coming from every corner of the cab at once. I don't remember exactly how long I drove after that. The landscape became surreal, stretches of road bending in ways they shouldn't, shadows flitting across the desert as if they had a life of their own. Signs disappeared, reappeared, changed. At one point, I saw a road fork where none had existed before. One path leading into pitch-black nothingness, the other continuing the highway, but I could hear something whispering from the dark fork, calling me, promising me it was the way forward. I took the highway, but the whispers followed. That's when I saw the figures. Dozens of them, standing along the roadside, tall, thin, pale, faces impossibly stretched, limbs bending in directions that defied logic. They didn't move toward me, but they were there, just watching. Their eyes followed my rig as I passed, and for a moment I felt a sick alien curiosity in their gaze, like I was being studied. A sudden gust of wind rattled the cab, and the figures were gone. I told myself I had imagined it. Exhaustion, stress, dehydration, but I didn't feel relief. I felt hunted. Around dawn, I reached a small truck stop in New Mexico. The lot was empty except for a single rig, old and rusted. I parked and sat in silence, staring at the dashboard, trying to convince myself it was over. But that's when I saw the reflection. In the windshield just over my shoulder, the figure from the desert was there, grinning, wet, pale, eyes empty. It wasn't outside. It was inside. Reflected. When I turned, there was nothing, only the empty cab and the rising sun breaking over the horizon. I don't know how it follows me. I don't know why it hunts truckers like me. I only know that every time I drive alone at night, I feel it, hear it, see it in the shadows, mirrors, reflections, the dark side of the road. Sometimes I glimpse it in my peripheral vision, and my stomach drops, my heart pounds, and I know it's there, just waiting for me to let my guard down. Other drivers will tell you it's fatigue, stress, or imagination. They'll shrug and tell stories of phantom lights and shadows. But I know better. I've lived it, I've felt it, and it never stops. Now, every time I haul a load alone, I drive with one eye on the mirrors, one hand on the wheel, and the other hand near the door handle or whatever I can grab. Sometimes, when the road is empty and the rain falls, I swear I see it crouched beside the shoulder, tall, wet, smiling, waiting, patient, watching, and I know that one day it won't let me go. Story the end. The highway at night has a way of swallowing you whole, and if you've ever driven a semi through the dark stretches of America, you know what I mean. The hum of the engine becomes a rhythm, the tires droning against the asphalt, a kind of hypnotic chant. And before long, the only thing keeping you awake are the little things. Flashes of light from passing signs, a radio host's static voice, or the occasional set of headlights sliding past in the opposite direction. But sometimes things happen on the road that jolt you awake in ways you'll never forget. That's what happened to me back in 2009. When I was hauling frozen meats from Illinois down to Texas. It was supposed to be a standard 3-day run. Nothing fancy, just miles and hours and truck stops. But I didn't know then how much that one trip would stick in my mind or how I'd carry it with me even now, years later. The first leg was easy, Chicago to St. Louis. I'd driven that route so many times I could probably have done it blindfolded. I stopped for gas, checked the reefer unit on the trailer, and kept pushing south. By the time I crossed into Missouri, it was just after midnight, the roads mostly empty, except for the other long-haul guys like me. If you've ever driven nights, you know how the CB chatter dies off around that time. Everyone's either tuned out or they're too tired to bother talking. That night, though, I picked up some chatter that stuck out. Any of y'all out there on I-55 southbound, keep your eyes peeled. Weird stuff tonight, a man's voice said, cutting through static. Guy in a van flagging folks down. I leaned toward the radio, adjusting the knob. What kind of weird stuff? I asked, pushing the talk button. No answer, just static. I chalked it up to some prankster or a guy too tired to finish his thought. Truckers tell stories over the radio like fishermen tell tall tales. Half the time it's just something to break the monotony. Still, something about the tone in his voice had an edge to it. I kept my eyes sharp as the white lines blurred beneath me. About 30 miles later, I saw it. Up ahead on the shoulder, flashing hazards. A white van, older model, maybe late 80s or early 90s, pulled just off the road. A man stood beside it, waving his arms as if he was desperate. He didn't look like a trucker. Thin, wiry, wearing a light-colored shirt that practically glowed in my headlights. He stepped into the lane as I approached, waving like crazy. I slowed a little, my foot easing off the accelerator, but every instinct told me not to stop. You learn early in this job that roadside setups are a recipe for getting robbed, or worse. I flipped on my high beams and laid on the air horn. The guy jumped back, throwing his arms up, packed, and I caught a good look at his face as I passed. Pale, gaunt, and his mouth hanging open in some kind of shout I couldn't hear. Something about him looked wrong, not drunk wrong, not desperate motorist wrong, just off. I kept going, heart pounding harder than it should have been. For the next hour, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that van trailing me, but the road stayed empty behind, black and still. By dawn, I pulled into a truck stop outside of Memphis, parked, and went inside for some breakfast. The waitress was a tired-looking woman in her 50s, the kind who'd seen every type of driver pass through. I ordered eggs and coffee, sat by the window, and tried not to think about the man with the van. But then I overheard two drivers in the booth behind me. "Did you hear about that fella they found off the highway last month?" one asked. Driver pulled over for a guy, flagging him down. Next thing, Gone. They found his rig stripped 20 miles south. The other grunted. Ain't the first, won't be the last. People out here do sick shit. My fork hovered over my plate, the food suddenly unappetizing. It might have been coincidence, sure, but it felt too damn close to what I'd seen. I finished quick, got back on the road, and tried to shake it off. South of Memphis, the land flattens out, stretches of highway running like veins across farmland and swamp. It's lonely out there. Not many exits, few lights, just miles of nothing. That night, it was me, the road, and the sound of my rig humming through the dark. Around 2 a.m, I spotted taillights up ahead. A van. White. Same shape. Same model. My stomach dropped. I slowed, my eyes glued to the reflective bumper. The van weaved a little, hugging the shoulder before drifting back. Maybe it wasn't the same one. Maybe it was just another tired motorist. But then, as I drew closer, I saw something that made my chest tighten. The back windows, completely blacked out as if covered by paint or thick curtains, and faintly, just faintly, a hand pressed against the glass. A hand that slid downward, leaving a streak. I tapped the brakes, falling back. My pulse thudded in my ears. The van suddenly sped up as if its driver realized I'd seen too much. Within minutes, its taillights disappeared into the distance. I kept my rig steady, but the image of that hand smeared against the glass wouldn't leave my head. By the time I hit Jackson, Mississippi, I was running on fumes, mentally and physically. I parked at a rest area, killed the engine, and leaned back in my seat. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale man waving on the shoulder or the shadow of the hand on the glass. When I finally drifted off, it was to dreams I didn't want to remember. The next day was a blur. Gas stations, way stations, and the endless monotony of the interstate. But that night, things escalated. Somewhere between Shreveport and Longview, I pulled into another rest stop, the kind that's just a circle of pavement with a few picnic tables and vending machines. I parked beside 2 other rigs, killed my lights, and stepped down to stretch. The night was humid, thick with the smell of pine and asphalt. Crickets chirped in the grass, and the place seemed quiet. Normal. I walked to the vending machine for a Coke, fed in a couple bucks, and cracked the can open. That's when I noticed the van, parked at the far edge of the lot, just barely visible under the weak yellow glow of a lamp. White. Old. Same model. No one inside, at least from what I could see. But I knew. I knew it was the same damn van. My throat went dry. I climbed back into my truck, locked the doors, and sat in silence. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to leave, to fire up the engine and get the hell out, but something in me froze. I couldn't take my eyes off that van. Minutes dragged. Then, without warning, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Thin, wiry, pale. The same one I'd seen waving on the highway. He didn't look at me. He just stood there, staring into the woods beyond the lot. And then, almost casually, he walked around to the back of the van and opened the doors. I wish I hadn't seen what was inside. Even from a distance, I could make out shapes, bundled, slumped shapes, at least 2, maybe 3. I couldn't tell if they were alive. I didn't want to know. My hands shook as I reached for the CB, flipping it on, but the line was dead static. No chatter. No nothing. The man glanced over his shoulder then, eyes locking with mine across the lot. Even in the dim light, I could see his smile. Wide. Too wide. He raised one finger to his lips like a shush gesture, then slowly closed the van doors. My chest felt like it was going to cave in. I didn't think. I just started the engine, threw it into gear, and pulled out of that lot like the devil himself was chasing me. My mirrors showed nothing but darkness. No headlights. No van. But I drove until the sun came up, hands aching from gripping the wheel so hard. When I finally delivered the load in Dallas, I didn't stick around. I dropped the trailer, signed the paperwork, and got the hell out. For weeks after, I scoured the news, expecting to see a report about missing people or a suspicious van, but nothing. No one said a damn thing. It was like it had never happened. Maybe I was the only one who saw. Years later, I still wonder about those shapes in the back of that van. Were they alive? Were they already gone? And that man, the pale, smiling man, what the hell was he doing out there, night after night, flagging people down? Sometimes, when I'm out on the road late, I still half expect to see those flashing hazards on the shoulder, that figure stepping into my lane, waving like he needs help. And every time I keep driving, because I know better now. I know some things on the road aren't accidents or breakdowns. Some things are traps, and if you stop, you might never start again. Story, the end. It was just past midnight when I rolled out of the truck stop in northern Oklahoma, my rig humming low and steady under me. I'd been on the road for nearly 20 hours, hauling a load of refrigerated goods to Kansas City, and my eyelids felt like sandbags. The road was almost empty, just the occasional set of headlights breaking the darkness. The rumble of my tires on asphalt, the only constant. I liked the solitude, normally. There's a strange peace in the open road at night, a quiet that you almost don't get during the day. But that night, the peace felt wrong. I passed an old exit sign for a tiny town, nothing but a faded gas station and a couple of boarded-up stores. I glanced at it in the rearview mirror, the light from my gauges casting shadows across the cab. There was a weird tension in the air, like the kind you get right before a storm, only there was no storm. I shrugged it off and kept going, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew heavier, like something invisible had climbed into the cab with me. About 30 miles down the highway, I noticed a car behind me, its headlights practically blinding. I figured it was just another long-haul driver, except this car was riding really close, hugging my bumper in a way that made my chest tighten. I flicked my high beams, then turned them off again, hoping it would signal them to back off. Nothing. They stayed glued to me, almost daring me to speed up. I glanced at my mirrors, and that's when I saw it, the passenger side window. There was a figure, just a shadow at first, hunched and still, but then slowly it lifted a hand pointing directly at me. I froze. Not the "oh, I'm startled" kind of freeze, but a deep, bone-chilling lockup, like my body had been betrayed by instinct. I yanked the wheel, swerved slightly, trying to shake them off. The car mimicked every move I made. My stomach sank. I had seen weird things on the road before, people driving reckless, tailgating to scare someone off, but this was different. There was no anger, no road rage, just presence, malice. I stomped the gas, pushed my rig to 75 miles per hour, but the car stayed behind, unwavering. Then it happened. The figure raised both hands and pressed them against the windshield, and for a second, I could have sworn the glass rippled like water. My heart jumped. I slammed my brakes hard, the rig fishtailing slightly, the trailer groaning. I had no choice but to pull off at the next rest area, my mind racing. As I parked, the car disappeared, just like that. No headlights, no engine sound, nothing. I sat there in the dark cab, hands shaking, trying to tell myself I was imagining things. I finally got out to stretch, trying to shake off the adrenaline. That's when I noticed footprints. One set leading from the road right up to my truck, muddy but fresh, as if someone had just walked up and touched the windshield. But there was something off. The footprints didn't seem human. Too long, too narrow, and the spacing between steps was all wrong. My stomach turned. I jumped back into the cab and locked the doors. No way I was going outside again tonight. I tried calling dispatch, tried calling a friend, anyone, Eishfrei, but the cell signal was dead. Perfectly dead. Like I'd driven into some no man's land where the world didn't exist. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the hum of my truck and the occasional whistle of wind through the trees. That's when I heard it. Scratching. Not a truck or road sound, not an animal. Something scratching against the metal side of my trailer. Slow, deliberate, getting louder. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was a raccoon, maybe a stray dog, but my gut screamed otherwise. I waited until the first light of dawn to move. I didn't look outside again until I hit the highway. When I did, I saw tire tracks alongside mine, muddy and chaotic, like whoever or whatever had been following me had run alongside my rig in the night. My blood ran cold. I drove faster than I had in years, heart hammering, never taking my eyes off the mirrors. By the time I got to Kansas City, the feeling hadn't left. I parked in the lot at the unloading dock, and as I climbed out, I noticed the trailer doors. Scratches. Hundreds of them. All across the metal, deep and jagged. They hadn't been there when I left Oklahoma. The thought made my stomach twist, my hands trembling. I shrugged it off publicly, told myself I'd just gotten spooked, that sleep deprivation was making me paranoid. But that night, when I parked at a motel for my mandatory rest, the nightmare followed me. I woke up at 2:37 a.m., the motel room silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. I saw a shadow move across the far wall, tall and thin, but when I blinked, nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just the ceiling fan casting shapes, but then I saw it. In the corner of the room near the window, a figure crouched. Not human, I realized, at least not entirely. Its head tilted in a way that no human could, eyes reflecting the dim light, unblinking. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The shadow lifted a hand, the same gesture from the highway, pointing directly at me, and then it vanished. The next day, I avoided talking about it. I unloaded my truck, tried to focus on paperwork, anything to keep my mind off the nights before. But that wasn't the end. Over the next 2 weeks, every stop, every rest area, every motel, there were signs. Footprints in the dirt near my truck, scratches along the trailer doors that appeared overnight, shadows glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, always watching, always pointing. I started sleeping with the lights on in my cab, even during the day. I installed cameras, hoping to catch something tangible. Nothing ever showed up on them. Just static, and shadows. Then the call started. No number, just silence when I picked up. But during those silent calls, I heard breathing. Slow, deliberate, like someone leaning close, right into the mouthpiece. I tried changing my number. I tried new routes. It didn't matter. I could feel it following, even when I couldn't see it. One night, near rural Illinois, it escalated. I was driving through a fog-heavy stretch, headlights cutting through the mist, when I saw it on the road ahead. A figure, tall and thin, standing in the middle of the highway. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching, skidding to a stop mere feet away. When I looked again, it was gone. Not run off the road, just vanished. My mirrors told the same story. The road behind me, empty. I was losing it. I knew it. Every mile, every night, my nerves fraying tighter, my stomach in knots. Every instinct screaming at me to quit, to park the rig and never drive again. But bills don't wait, and a trucker knows, you keep moving. Then came the night I almost didn't. Somewhere near St. Louis, the cab lights flickered, then went out completely. My gauges died, the engine ticking over like a lifeless heartbeat. I sat there, dark, completely blind except for the pale light of the moon. That's when I heard it on the roof of the cab. Scraping, dragging. Heavy steps. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. But I couldn't get the door open. The steps moved along the cab, then onto the hood. I pressed myself against the passenger side, trying not to scream, and that's when I saw it. In the reflection of my side mirror, eyes. Black, deep, unending. They stared at me, unblinking, before the figure moved, not walking, but sliding, twisting impossibly along the side of my truck, following me. Every nerve in my body screamed, and I stomped the accelerator. The engine roared to life, lights flickering on, and the figure was gone. Just like that. I drove straight through the night, not stopping, eyes darting constantly to every shadow along the road. I didn't sleep, not for hours, not until the sun rose high over Missouri. Weeks passed, and the encounters became more frequent, more intense. I started seeing it in rest areas, crouched in the dark by my truck, or standing silently by the highway, watching me pass. It would never approach directly, never try to touch me, but the sense of being hunted never left. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep. My mind was unraveling. Eventually, I started recording every encounter. Dash cams, night vision cameras, everything. But when I played back the footage, nothing. Shadows flickered, a shape here and there, but never fully. It was always just beyond the camera's reach. A presence felt more than seen. It was on a Tuesday, around midnight, when I had the closest call yet. A long, empty stretch of highway in rural Kansas. The fog rolled in thick, headlights barely cutting through. My rig hummed low, and I was on edge, staring down the long road. That's when I saw it. A figure standing dead center in my lane, impossibly tall, limbs bent at unnatural angles. My heart froze. I slammed the brakes, the rig fishtailing trailer swerving slightly. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. I swerved hard, almost hitting the guardrail, tires screaming, adrenaline pumping like fire in my veins. I could see its reflection in my side mirrors, towering and impossibly thin, watching me. And then it stepped aside, out of my lane, but I swear I felt it reach, fingers brushing the air where my cab had been moments ago. I sped off, hands shaking, sweat cold on my neck. I called dispatch, police, anyone, but no reports. No other drivers had seen it, just me. That night, parked in a rest area, I saw the shadow again. crouched behind a truck, eyes glinting, pointing. I realized then that it wasn't just following me, it was marking me, watching, waiting, learning. And I knew with a certainty that made my blood run cold that it wasn't going to stop. Not until I didn't even want to finish the thought. I keep driving. I can't stop. Not if I want to keep my sanity. Not if I want to keep some semblance of life. But every mile is a reminder. Every shadow a warning. And the moment I close my eyes, I see it, pointing, waiting, always waiting. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it chose me. But I know it's out there somewhere, on these endless highways, in the dead of night, stalking. And I know it won't stop. Every night, every mile, I pray for the sun, but the sun never comes fast enough. Story the end. The hum of the diesel engine was my only companion as I rolled down Interstate 40, stretching from New Mexico to North Carolina. The highway was empty tonight, the kind of emptiness that made the world feel both vast and claustrophobic at the same time. My rig's headlights cut through the inky darkness, reflecting off the occasional road sign that seemed miles apart. I'd been hauling freight for nearly 15 years, and I had seen the night do some strange things to a person's mind. But nothing prepared me for what was about to happen on that long stretch of asphalt in western Oklahoma. I had been driving since early evening, pushing to make it to the truck stop near Elk City before the overnight storms rolled in. The weather apps had predicted light rain, but by the time I hit the open highway, the clouds had thickened into something more ominous, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Rain started as a fine mist, barely noticeable on my windshield, then thickened into a steady sheet, washing over the asphalt in waves that reflected the glow of my headlights. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing, and I slowed my rig, grateful for the cruise control I had been using earlier. About an hour into the rain, I noticed it. Something unusual, a hitchhiker standing by the shoulder. My first thought was disbelief. It was pitch black, and the storm was enough to keep most people indoors. But there he was, a man in his late 20s, soaking wet, thumb out, hitching a ride. He wore a cheap, hooded raincoat, the kind you see in discount stores, and jeans that were muddy at the knees. He looked tired but not desperate, and something about him didn't quite sit right. I slowed the truck to a crawl, pulling over a few feet ahead so I could open the passenger door. "You need a ride?" I called over the rain. He nodded but didn't smile. "Yeah, thanks." His voice was flat, monotone, almost like he'd been speaking for hours without rest. I've picked up hitchhikers before, but it's been a long time, mostly people going short distances, stranded near truck stops looking for help. I hesitated, then shrugged. "Where are you headed?" He looked out through the windshield, eyes fixed on the dark highway ahead. "Just down the road, anywhere safe." I gestured for him to climb in, and he did without a word. The smell of wet clothes and damp hair hit me immediately. He didn't offer a name, and I didn't ask. We drove in silence for a few miles. The rain pounded on the roof like a percussion track, and the tires hissed across the wet asphalt. After about 10 minutes, I glanced over. He was staring straight ahead, not at the dashboard, not at me, just at the road. And I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. He didn't blink. Not once. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring. I forced myself to look away, thinking maybe it was just the angle of the lights, a trick of my imagination. I tried to make small talk. "Crazy weather tonight? Huh?" "Yeah." That was it. One word. Flat. He didn't flinch at the thunder or the flashes of lightning. His hands rested stiffly on his lap. I had that uneasy feeling that you get when someone in your life is wrong in ways you can't quite define. My instincts screamed at me to drop him off at the next exit, but something kept me driving as if inertia had taken over. A few miles later, I noticed the storm intensifying. Sheets of rain were coming down, visibility dropping to maybe 50 feet. Then I saw it, a vehicle in the median, flipped on its side, smoke curling up from the engine. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over to the shoulder. I could see a few figures trying to crawl out of the wreck, their faces ghostly in the headlights. Without thinking, I grabbed my raincoat and ran toward the wreck. The hitchhiker followed silently, staying a few steps behind. The scene was chaotic, glass everywhere, the stench of gasoline, someone crying out in pain. I helped pull an older woman from the passenger side. Her leg was bent at an unnatural angle. "Call 911, I yelled at the hitchhiker, expecting him to reach for his phone. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching. And then I noticed something else. His reflection in the car's shattered window was wrong. His face shifted. One second it looked normal, the next it seemed thinner, elongated, almost like a skull beneath the skin. I shook my head, telling myself it was stress, the rain, exhaustion. Paramedics arrived minutes later. They took over, moving people onto stretchers. I stepped back, drenched, shivering. And then he was gone. The hitchhiker. I looked around, expecting him to step behind me, maybe apologize, but the spot where he had been standing was empty. I scanned the dark highway, the median, the wet grass. Nothing. No footprints. No car. No sign that he had ever been there. I called it a fluke, a hallucination brought on by fatigue. I even laughed at myself quietly, shaking my head. I got back into my rig and started driving again, slower this time. The road stretched ahead, wet and lonely. That's when I saw him again, standing by the shoulder, thumb out, same raincoat, same mud-stained jeans. My stomach turned. I slammed on the brakes again. The figure didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stared at me. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white. I told myself to keep driving, but my brain froze. Then the rain stopped, just like that. One moment it was pouring, the next it was dry. I squinted through the windshield. The highway looked normal now. The wreckage gone. The median was empty, and so was the shoulder. No hitchhiker. No accident. Nothing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the storm. Maybe fatigue had caught up with me. I took a deep breath and resumed driving. My eyes darted to every shadow, every curve in the road. I thought I was alone until a faint tapping sound echoed from the sleeper cab behind me. I live alone, and no one was in the sleeper. My heart raced. I stopped, got out, and looked back. Nothing. I shook my head and climbed back in. I could feel the air shift, the temperature drop. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic, like fingernails drumming on metal. I turned on all the lights in the cab, checked the mirrors, even opened the doors. Nothing. I started driving again, this time faster, adrenaline surging. Then came the voice, low, raspy from the back of the sleeper. Don't leave. Leave. I froze. No one could be back there. I spun around, flashlight in hand, swinging it through the sleeper. Empty. Every piece of gear, every mattress, every bag exactly where it had been. But the air felt heavier, charged, like something unseen was breathing down my neck. I floored it. I had to get to a safe place, a populated truck stop. The next exit was 10 miles ahead, and each mile felt like an eternity. My rig shook as I swerved to avoid a deer, or what I thought was a deer, until it vanished mid-leap. By the time I pulled into the truck stop, I was drenched in sweat, shaking, my chest tight. I called dispatch, told them I needed to rest, something was off. They told me to pull over, which I did. I parked in a well-lit area, far from any other trucks. I tried to sleep. I thought maybe exhaustion had gotten to me. Maybe I'd imagined the hitchhiker, the tapping, the voice. But in the middle of the night, the rig door creaked open. I bolted upright. The hitchhiker was there, standing beside the truck, staring at me, wet, mud-stained, unblinking. I screamed, ran outside, but he was gone again. The rig door was locked from the inside, and yet the latch was unlatched. I couldn't explain it. No one else was around. No security cameras. Nothing. Morning came, but I didn't sleep. I got back on the highway, trying to shake the events from my mind. Everything seemed normal, mundane, the kind of day-to-day trucking I was used to. But every exit I passed, every truck stop, every stretch of empty highway, I kept thinking I saw him, a shadow in the median, a reflection in the mirrors. A figure just standing, watching. Weeks later, I met a fellow trucker in a diner in Oklahoma City. He was older, grizzled, and I told him a watered-down version of what happened. He listened quietly, then leaned in. "You saw him," he said. "That part of I-40 has a legend. Every few years, someone sees a man hitchhiking in the storm. They pick him up, help him, then he disappears. Never shows up on camera, never leaves a trace. Some say he's looking for something. Some say he's looking for someone." I didn't sleep well that night. Couldn't stop thinking about him, the unblinking eyes, the voice from the sleeper. I checked my rig, every latch, every lock, convinced he could be anywhere. Over the next few weeks, I avoided that stretch of highway entirely, taking detours, even if it added hours to my route. But the memory stayed. Every time it rained, every time I saw a figure in the distance, I thought of him. The hitchhiker who shouldn't exist, the one who waits in storms, watching, unblinking, and ready to vanish. Years have passed, but I've heard stories from other truckers. Same highway, same circumstances. People pick him up, people call him a ghost, a spirit, a hallucination. But the stories are all too similar. The rain, the empty highway, the man who disappears. And sometimes drive alone at night, especially in a storm, I swear I see him, just standing there, thumb out, waiting. Waiting for someone else to drive by, someone else to see. I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. I don't linger on the shoulder, and I don't drive I-40 after dark when the weather turns ugly. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see those eyes. Wide, unblinking, watching. And I can hear the faint tapping in the back of my rig, slow, rhythmic, like fingernails on metal. I've tried to tell myself it was a dream, a trick of the storm, a hallucination brought on by years of solitary nights on the road. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. The hitchhiker is out there somewhere, and he's still waiting. Waiting for the next driver who is tired, lonely, and trusting enough to stop. And when you see him, there's no explaining it, no reasoning. Just the cold, creeping certainty that you're not alone. Story the end. The hum of the engine was a constant, monotonous presence, almost like a heartbeat, as Joe Matthews drove his rig down the endless stretch of Interstate 40. The sun had long disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the road bathed in the pale glow of his headlights and the occasional flicker from distant billboards advertising everything from truck stops to local diners. He had been driving since noon, a solid 10 hours with only short breaks for fuel and food, and his eyes were starting to ache from the strain. But he knew he had to keep going. The delivery schedule didn't care about exhaustion, and he was already behind by several hours. The radio crackled intermittently, mostly static, but sometimes picking up distant stations with old country music or talk shows. Joe preferred the silence, though, the engine's drone and the tires rolling over asphalt, giving him a rhythm that somehow kept him awake. Tonight was supposed to be a routine run from Oklahoma City to Albuquerque. Nothing unusual, just miles and miles of highway. But he felt that familiar edge of unease that had started months ago during long hauls, the feeling that someone or something was watching him, lurking just beyond the beams of his headlights. He shook it off. It was nothing, he told himself. Just the isolation, the monotony, the fatigue. Yet, as he rounded a bend near a stretch of road known as Devil's Pass, his headlights caught something in the distance. A figure standing at the edge of the road, frozen, motionless. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, but as he drew closer, he realized the figure was unnaturally still. Not even the wind seemed to disturb it. A chill ran down his spine. Joe slowed, not because he planned to stop, but because curiosity and a creeping sense of dread made him instinctively cautious. As he approached, the figure became clearer. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man, wearing tattered clothes that flapped loosely in the night breeze. But his posture was wrong, too rigid, too deliberate. The closer he got, the more he felt a gnawing sense of wrongness, as if the man wasn't really human at all. Then the man raised his head slowly, turning to face Joe, and the eyes, black, bottomless voids, stared back. Joe slammed the accelerator, his knuckles white on the wheel, heart hammering. He didn't look back until miles later, and even then, the figure was gone, leaving no trace, not even footprints. The rest of the drive was tense. Joe kept glancing in his mirrors, half expecting to see the man appear in the distance, somehow keeping pace with his truck. He thought about stopping at the next truck stop, but the unease didn't leave him. It only intensified. Finally, around 2 a.m., he pulled into a rest area near Tucumcari. He parked in a remote corner, trying to get some sleep before hitting the road again. But sleep didn't come. Every creak of the truck, every distant howl of a coyote made him flinch. He tried the radio again, hoping for static, some human sound, but there was nothing. Just the low, steady hum of the engine and the wind whistling through the rig's cracks. After what felt like an hour, he stepped out to stretch his legs. The air was cold, sharper than usual, biting at his skin. As he walked around the truck, he noticed tire tracks in the dirt nearby, heading toward the edge of the woods. Fresh tracks, not his own. He froze. They were wide, heavy, uneven, like something large had been walking on two legs, and they ended abruptly, right at the tree line, as if whatever had made them had vanished into thin air. His rational mind told him it had to be a prank, a trick of the moonlight, but another part of him knew better. He felt eyes on him, unseen, waiting. Shaking, he climbed back into the cab, double-locked the doors, and refused to leave again until sunrise. When the first light broke over the horizon, painting the desert in dull oranges and purples, the tracks were gone. The area looked untouched, as if nothing had happened at all. Joe tried to brush it off, telling himself he'd been exhausted, imagining things, but the unease lingered. That night, he decided he wasn't going to stop any more strange, isolated rest areas. Stick to truck stops with other drivers, well-lit, populated, safety in numbers. The following week, Joe found himself back on I-40, headed east this time. He drove during the day as much as possible, but schedules and deadlines forced him into night shifts again. Around midnight, he took a routine stop at a truck stop in Amarillo, grabbing coffee and a sandwich. The place was busy enough, filled with other drivers, and for a while he felt normal again. But as he returned to his rig, he noticed something odd, a handwritten note pinned under his windshield wiper. He frowned, heart sinking. Picking it up, he read a simple, chilling message. "You saw me. I see you." Panic set in. He scanned the parking lot, other drivers going about their business. No one seemed to be paying attention. Who would write something like this? A prank? A stalker? The rational part of his brain screamed to call the police. But he didn't. Not yet. He tore the note into tiny pieces and tossed them in the trash. Yet the fear gnawed at him for hours. That night, he kept glancing in the mirrors, seeing shadows where none should be, and hearing faint, deliberate knocks against the trailer's metal siding. Every sound was amplified in the dead of night. As weeks passed, the incidents escalated. Joe began noticing figures in the distance, always just at the edge of headlights, always disappearing when he focused on them. Sometimes at rest stops, he'd wake in the middle of the night to find someone standing by his rig, staring. Always silent, always unmoving. He reported nothing, fearing that if he told anyone, they'd think he was losing his mind. Truckers talk about ghost stories, sure, but this wasn't stories. This was happening to him, and it was escalating. One night, near Tucumcari again, he took a wrong turn onto a deserted service road. GPS was useless here. The road stretched endlessly, flanked by dense woods, and the air grew colder with every mile. He was tired, irritated, but pressed on. Then, headlights appeared in the distance behind him. Another truck? He slowed, letting it pass, but as it drew closer, it became clear something was off. There were no markings, no headlights on the front, only two faint pinpricks of light at the height of a human head. Joe's stomach turned. The vehicle matched his speed, keeping pace exactly, never closing the distance, just following. No horn, no engine noise, nothing but those two pinpricks of light, unblinking, unfeeling. Joe panicked, trying to lose it, taking sharp turns, accelerating. The truck mirrored every movement. He thought of calling 911, but the radio was dead. No cell signal. Every instinct screamed to run, but running meant driving blind into unknown terrain. Sweat poured down his back. The figure, or vehicle, kept pace, silent, patient, relentless. Hours passed, though in reality it was maybe 20 minutes, time stretching in the fear-drenched night. Eventually, he reached a small town, lights spilling onto the highway, gas stations open, people around. He slammed the brakes, turned onto the main road, and the truck, or whatever it was, vanished. Gone. Just like that. Joe's hands shook so violently he could barely start the engine. He parked, locked himself inside, and didn't move until dawn, watching the road for any sign. There was none. He knew deep down that whatever had been following him wasn't bound by normal rules. It didn't need roads, didn't need reason, and it remembered him. Sleep became nearly impossible. Joe tried to take days off, but anxiety gnawed at him. When he finally returned to the road, he started documenting everything, the times, locations, details of the sightings. Patterns emerged. Almost always, the incidents happened on long stretches of road, isolated areas, when he was alone. It wasn't random. It was hunting, or at least tracking, and it always ended when other people were nearby. One night in western Texas, Joe stopped at a truck stop off I-20. Exhaustion weighed heavily, but he couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., he decided to get coffee, walking into the dimly lit diner. Inside, he saw a man sitting alone at a table in the corner, face obscured by shadows. Something about him set Joe's teeth on edge. The man didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. Joe froze. The diner seemed to hum, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly. He felt a cold weight in his chest. The unmistakable sense that he had been caught, that the man knew exactly what he had done, what he had seen. When Joe looked away for just a moment, the man was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving behind a chair that hadn't been disturbed. He checked the exits, the kitchen, the bathrooms. Nothing. The encounters grew worse. Sometimes, when Joe was parked for the night, the shadowy figure, or figures, would tap on the sides of the trailer. Other nights, he'd wake to find scratches along the metal siding, deep, deliberate, like someone had pressed a knife against it. Once he opened the door to grab something from the cab, and a handprint, too large to be human, was smeared across the aluminum. His heart raced, and the smell of iron, like blood, lingered in the air, though there was no injury, no spill. Joe stopped telling anyone. Friends, dispatchers, even his own brother, all dismissed it as stress, lack of sleep, paranoia. But he knew the truth. He could feel the presence when it wasn't visible, the malevolent patience lingering in every shadow. He began to change his routines, driving only in groups when possible, avoiding isolated highways at night. But sometimes, schedules forced him back into the solitude he hated. And each time, the figures returned, biding their time, watching, waiting. One particularly long haul, heading into New Mexico, Joe felt the weight of the night pressing harder than ever. Around midnight, he took a detour onto a rural back road to avoid traffic. The road was dark, lined with thick trees that clawed at the edges of his headlights. Suddenly, the rig's engine cut out. Complete silence, save for the wind. The dashboard lights flickered and went dark. Joe tried the ignition, the radio, anything, but nothing worked. Panic set in. That's when he heard it, soft, deliberate footsteps circling the truck. Not a vehicle, not wind or animals. Footsteps. He froze, heart hammering. The door handle rattled, lightly at first, then more insistently. Joe grabbed a tire iron from the cab, prepared to defend himself. The footsteps paused, silence again. Then a voice, low and rasping, whispered from the shadows, "You can't run." His blood ran cold. He swung the door open, but nothing was there. The engine roared back to life as if nothing had happened. Joe didn't stop to question it. He floored the accelerator, the tires gripping the road, the shadows seeming to chase him even as they vanished behind him. After that night, Joe stopped taking long hauls alone. He began driving in convoys, avoiding the isolated roads, staying in populated areas. But he knew it wasn't gone. He felt it in every stretch of empty highway, in every dark rest stop, in every flicker of movement outside the mirrors. He didn't know if it was human, something supernatural, or something else entirely. All he knew was the cold, certain knowledge that it remembered him, and it would never let him forget. Even now, months later, Joe finds himself checking over his shoulder at every turn, every parking lot, every mile of asphalt that stretches endlessly ahead. The hum of the engine is still comforting in its familiarity, but it also reminds him of the unseen eyes that haunt him. Some nights he swears he can feel a weight pressing against the cab, a presence leaning just out of sight, whispering from the shadows. And he knows that the road, which he once loved for its freedom, has become a trap, a place where he is hunted and there is no escape. Story, the end.